Hey, Bitcoin wealth builders. Welcome to episode 76 of Bitcoin Hard Talk. Did you miss me last week? I took the week off and now I got 2 weeks to cover, which is always problematic, but we're going to cover everything that's happened in the last couple of weeks related to Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics. We do it every single week, with the exception of last week. I had 30 days of fasting and Eid happened to coincide with when we were doing Bitcoin Hard Talk. So I thought I would spend a little bit of time with family and get back to you this week. And I am charged and ready. And look what happened. I take 1 week off and Trump wipes out $5 trillion of Federal Reserve proof of weapons network pumped stock market and does a little bit of a correction with one meeting. We're going to be covering that, of course. There's so much to cover. So if you are new to the show, welcome. My name is Simon Dixon. I've spent the last 25 years of my life obsessing over investing and money, and the last 15 years on Bitcoin as well. We cover and break down everything that's happened this week in Bitcoin, macro, and geopolitics as we transition to a world of Bitcoin, AI, and central bank digital currencies. We break the show down into 3 parts. In part 1, we're going to be covering this week in Bitcoin, crypto, CBDCs, and we're going to be covering the immense amount of progress, the incredible fast pace at which the stablecoin, CBDC, and Bitcoin Standard is progressing, even in the last 2 weeks since the last show I gave when I went through the US Stablecoin Standard and the EU CBDC Standard. In part 2, this week in macro, we're going to be covering, of course, what else could we be covering but the Trump tariffs and what I think comes next by following the money. And this one's a hard one. Everybody is trying to figure out what's going on. You know my methodology if you were a long-term watcher. You know that I follow the money to try and figure out and get you ahead. Now, most people or some people will call that a bit conspiratorial, but I believe that when you follow the monetary flows, you get ahead, and then everyone tries to figure out what happened once it actually happened. And that's what Bitcoin Hard Talk is always about, trying to get you ahead so that you can prepare for this world of Bitcoin AI and CBDCs. And in part 3, we're going to be going around some things which I think very hard for the average person that doesn't follow the money and is not a long-term listener of Bitcoin Hard Talk to understand. But in all the carnage that is happening in the war escalations right now, I'm actually very confident that we are moving to the end of some of these escalations and a new world order. And that new world order is not based upon the Federal Reserve and European Central Bank supremacy, because they are capitulating to the new power brokers of the region. And we're going to be going through that. So I'm going to be going through the Middle East, everything that's happened over the last 17 months, and why I now believe that shortly, imminently, the humanitarian crisis and a new era, let's call it a fourth turning if you've read that book, is imminent for those that are on the right side of the proof of weapons network. And I'm going to be going through all the different regions and how that is escalating. So without further ado, let's start with part 1 this week in Bitcoin. So as I've covered in previous shows, you'll notice that I've been sharing how with the Trump administration, even before the election, I was saying that people need to vote for him, despite the fact that there is a lot I don't like. There are vital things that I do like. And one of them is the attack vector of the self-sovereignty of being able to own your own Bitcoin by adjusting countries into a game theoretical scenario that leads to an eventual Bitcoin standard. And secondly, the fact that we can have a speculative attack on fractional reserve banking and a deleveraging controlled demolition by moving to a stablecoin standard. Now, a stablecoin standard, as you know, is swapping one evil for another evil, but it's an incremental controlled demolition that can happen in a way more peaceful way at the same time as the geopolitical section correcting all the wrongs of the proof of weapons network in the past, the fiat currency financial terrorists that have caused so much problems in the world by creating a debt-based Ponzi scheme. Now, that debt-based Ponzi scheme relies upon, at layer one, the central banks. At layer two, the intelligence agencies, which are essentially the mob, the gangsters, that don't have national security in mind, but do everything about protecting corporate interests and creating and trafficking drugs, sex trafficking, weapons trafficking. If you watch things like Operation Gladio, if you've read those books, which I recommend, you'll understand that intelligence was created in order to take and governmentalize many of the worst crimes against humanity. And then layer three, you have governments, and you have the installation of puppets, which are there in order to do the bidding of layer one and layer two. And so one of the things you need to do, take away the power of layer one, is remove the gateway drug, which is debt. And a slow transition away from debt is moving away from a fractional reserve banking system, which is a slow confiscation of wealth and the indebtedness of governments that gets them bigger and bigger through war, death, and destruction, through funding massive weapons networks and war networks, and which is designed into the system, and slowly transitioning it with full reserve. Now, it's not perfect, but full reserve is capitulated or created in essence from an innovation that came from Bitcoin, which is stablecoins. And stablecoins are like digital ways of sending a dollar or a fiat currency around the world on top of a blockchain. It is backed by US treasuries or government debt, but it is fully reserved. It is not fractional reserved. It is not banks creating money every time they issue a loan in a debt-based Ponzi scheme that cannot be repaid. It is fully reserved. Now, that does mean that you can weaponize government, of course, but it is a incremental step in the process. And I'm going to be going through why what happened in the last week or so is some very important updates in how you can accelerate that process or kind of create a stable coin that just allows banks to commit crime cheaper and perpetuates the same system. Or we can actually give everybody a tool because, the central banks have essentially wiped out middle classes all around the world. But a tool that middle class can use in combination with Bitcoin in order to fight back against the oppressive nature of the proof of weapons network and fiat currency. So, as I've said, the US is slowly moving towards a stablecoin standard. And Europe, as I've said, is kind of a beta test for communism on a blockchain. Let's call it a technocratic totalitarianism. I don't like using the word communism all the time because it is a brutal regime, an ideology that always fails. But, it is a word that people understand. And 1984 authoritarianism in a debt-based Ponzi scheme that gives more and more central banks power is a form of communistic, which is what the Federal Reserve gold was. Is how it took America from 1913 from about 250 million in debt to $37 trillion in debt, plus the $250 trillion of committed liabilities that it has. It makes the government bigger, and it creates the distortions that the proof of weapons network is trying to figure out how to deal with. But of course, we know a Ponzi scheme is a Ponzi scheme. And so you can take it in different directions to try and roll it over. But the end result is that you have more and more centralizing control, whether it be technocratic banks or whether it be technocratic companies in a stablecoin standard, or you just go full-blown authoritarian and centralized with a central bank digital currency. So in October this year, the digital euro launched, and the euro, the CBDC in Europe, is the beta test for what the rest of the world might be able to get away with. In the meantime, it's the 1984 in Europe, basically surveillance state. And you commit, if you watch, if you've read the book Operation Gladio, you'll know that the whole idea is to create strategic tension so that you can fear people through false flag operations executed by MI6, CIA, Mossad, and various other intelligence networks in order to create a surveillance state, change laws, and then perpetuate the criminal networks that funds all of the intelligence class and uses the central banks in order to siphon off money in the layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. But anyway, it's all about this stablecoin and CBDC standard. While we do get a little gift of crowding out fractional reserve banking slowly with full reserve banking over time, depending on what laws and what protections the proof of weapons network, the regulators put in place. In the end, these are two coins of the same thing, but slightly different. One is you're controlled by billionaires that have all the social credit scores, all the data. The other is you're controlled by the proof of weapons network. Both kind of lead to the same thing because the proof of weapons network co-opts the billionaires. And therefore, billionaires like Elon Musk, they get access to military technology, but they still have to do the bidding. And then they have to wipe it in a flag of entrepreneurship to make Americans think that they got a different model, when really they got a similar model to what we have in Europe. But Europe is a bit more, covert about it. And then China is just full covert, and everyone's kind of more efficient because they just know what their government is. Whereas if you go along those different models where Europe is kind of, a covert operation moving to overt, you have and in America, it's like full covert operation, but they're all kind of the same model and the networks all connect into these centralizing forces. In the end, anyway, it is about handing over more and more economic power to banks, to artificial intelligence, to the Trump administration in the case of who's connected to the stablecoin standard. In the case of Europe, the European Central Bank, technocrats are going to be building these social credit scores. Elites, banks, financial institutions, all of those, if you've watched my video on how the proof of weapons network operates, and if you haven't watched it, go to my YouTube channel, go back and watched it. I dug it out from the middle of one of these episodes. And you can check it out there. Just search Simon Dixon Proof of Weapons Network on my YouTube channel. Well, anyway, the transition to this stablecoin standard is moving at a rapid pace. So Bo Hines, which is the Presidential Council of Advisors for Digital Assets, he came out and said that stablecoin legislation is imminent. Expect it on the president's desk in 2 months. And so, this is essentially the legislation by which tech giants are going to be able to slowly take their chunk of the dollar and back it by treasuries and slowly take some of the power away from the Federal Reserve System and almost have a neo-monetary stroke fiscal policy, which is a radically different model as we transition to this. Why? Because through de-dollarization, foreign governments don't want to be weaponized through the dollar anymore. Because the proof of weapons use sanctions, covert regime change, war, death, destruction. In fact, over the last couple of 100 years, killed 300 million people to prop up the dollar through all of these covert wars, overt wars, and everything that backs up the proof of weapons network that made the British pound that was created from the Bank of England over to the Federal Reserve and the US dollar has killed 300 million people in order to prop up that system globally. And because of that, people are de-dollarizing and they don't want to give power to the dollar. And they're recognizing that there are shifts, and the global capital of the proof of weapons network is redistributing its capital to other regions in order to be more diversified, because just like in World War I, it was a transition from the Bank of England to the Federal Reserve, and wars were the mechanism for taking all of Germany's gold, Russia's gold, the colonial gold of the British and French empires, and transferring them all across to the Federal Reserve proof of weapons network. It takes its course because it is by definition something you can milk for as long as possible. But when the debt is no longer subscribed to, that becomes the end of the Ponzi and the dominoes start to fall. Now, they create new tools all the time to prop it up, and they create new mechanisms of extracting more value from everyday people and transferring that wealth over to those that are connected to the 0% interest loan by being able to borrow through quantitative easing. Or you have the special subsidy of a bank where you can literally create the dollar every time you issue a loan. And so then you get the super subsidy and you're able to control the flows of cash in order to rig the system by the politicians and lobby everything in your favor to prop up the system for as long as possible. But the stablecoin standard is essentially a tech giant led. And if you look at the military industrial complex, you look at the large companies, the Lockheed Martins, the Raytheons, the General Dynamics, all of their products are now moving to cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and they're beta testing that in Gaza, which is, using technology to commit genocide. And that will be the future of the integrations into these stable coins if you can create false flag operations through strategic tension in order to manufacture consent for law changes. And therefore, this is the beta test. Integrate it into stable coins, integrate it into CBDCs, beta test it on Europe, and then bring it to America, and then consolidate that when eventually the Ponzi scheme collapses and you can replace it with one currency. That's the end, of this. And there is a resistance against that in 2008 in Bitcoin. And then also those that are operating off non-debt-based monetary systems. But they also get corrupted and lead to authoritarianism, kind of the different models that are happening down the BRICS corridor as well. Anyway, it's a tech giant led, and obviously they have all the data. So economies are re-collaborating around this new ecosystem that's being built in order to have a programmatic dollar, and a system that can lead to this eventual social credit score, one in Europe and one in America. And so in order to progress towards that, the gift we get is the end of fractional reserve banking in a peaceful way. The problem we get from that is we move over to a technocracy and a social credit score. You're replacing one evil with another, but it gives you more time to use the system if you're watching Bitcoin Hard Talk in order to exit the system by accumulating as much Bitcoin as possible and using the financial weapons of mass destruction to understand the game and use the programmatic money to end up with more Bitcoin. And then you have a resistance against the full command and control money, using money you can own, money you can spend, and money that has a fixed supply backed by the largest proof of work, 800 exahashes distributed supercomputer that Bitcoin gave to us in order to resist against it. Well, anyway, there were a couple of big drops anyway. One of them was the Stable Act, and the Stable Act is essentially the House. And the House is saying, here's a stablecoin legislation. And also at the same time, rather than just the Congress bill, or the Congress Act, Senate also advocates for something called the Genius Act. And so you've got these two different bills around stablecoins, a promise that they're going to be done within next 2 months, and probably bipartisan consent. But there is also a banking lobby and a technocrat lobby that wants to ensure that these acts are in favor to their special interest. And I want to make sure that so if you're engaging in the process, you can try and have some of your lobby pressure in order to try and make sure that this system works for us so that we can actually have this peaceful transition rather than perpetuate the Ponzi scheme by allowing banks to commit crime cheaper using stable coins and social credit scores. But anyway, from these acts, the core features are as follows. The stable coins must be backed by what they call high quality liquid assets, i.e. government debt. You can't have more exotic, you can't have corporate bonds. It must be simple, high-grade government debt. That gives governments a tool to borrow, but it also means that they have almost a new monetary policy tool by issuing stable coins and co-opting and allowing the technocrats, the X's of the world, the World Liberty Financials of the world, the Zuckerbergs of the world that will all have their stable coins. You give them a special subsidy in order to cream off the special subsidy from government debt, and most likely they'll convert it to Bitcoin to protect themselves. But if you can actually pass on that yield, and I'll go through a bit more, then you can actually benefit from it yourself and use Bitcoin as a mechanism for making sure that you protect yourself rather than them protect themselves, which is the current model that we have. Anyway, They must be backed by high quality liquid assets. So they must be liquid, as in they're very easy to sell when people want to redeem those stable coins for dollars in their bank. And they gave decentralization or centralization a 2-year head start. There was a 2-year ban on algorithmic stablecoins. That is the mechanism by which you could take Bitcoin, for example, and Bitcoin layer 1 allows you to send Bitcoin, own it yourself, send it anywhere, and has a fixed supply so that you can beat the Federal Reserve System, increase your wealth while everyone else is in debt slavery. The layer 2, called Lightning Network, allows you to, through updates, I don't want to get too geeky, but you can essentially launch tokens like stable coins on top of it. And then using algorithmic formulas, you could back it by some of your Bitcoin, take out stable coins against your Bitcoin, and you can do that programmatically, all within self-custody, so that no middleman or bank is needed in the middle. And that is the ultimate place to be. But they want to give the banks and technocrats a 2-year head start before programmatic stable coins are allowed, i.e. they want to perpetuate, they want to make sure that you're addicted to their stable coin, so it becomes very hard to get a programmatic stable coin outside of the system. So there's the first PSYOP that they're trying to introduce. It's what we're going to be moving to is kind of like free banking era. So pre-1913, we had a free banking area where banks were able to create the dollar, and they had lots of different versions of the dollar until it was centralized into the Federal Reserve System. And banks could create their dollar, and you had a different score kind of with those banks, and they would take different risks. But now they're dishing out stable coins, which is like a full reserve free banking era. It is very disruptive, very, very different. It essentially, is a redistribution of power to those that can issue these stable coins. It's basically digitized full reserve banking, wrapped in kind of a crypto type of close, but it is incredibly disruptive to the fractional reserve banking model. And so the OCC, the regulator of the currency, the Federal Reserve, and the banking cartel that is shareholders in the Federal Reserve will do anything that they can do in order to make a version that allows them to remain in power and remain and having their super subsidy, rather than opening it up to competition, because then you might be able to attack the system and have a real free market, which is the last thing the Federal Reserve wants after over 100 years of bringing America to a wiped out middle class and asset stripping all of the assets away, ready for them to invest in the next global regions and blocks so they can hedge away from America like they did after the Bank of England took over England and got us into all of those wars as well, to gain full control. But anyway, the stablecoin market capitalization as it is today is approximately $214 billion. That's up 63% year on year. It was actually created through a company that I'm a shareholder in, Bitfinex. They purchased a coin, I think it was called True USD at the time, if I remember correctly. That became Tether. It was built on top of a layer 2 on top of Bitcoin called Omni. That was originally called Mastercoin. And then they built that layer 2. They built a network for transforming, being able to send dollars around the different exchanges without having to go through the banking system. And then this grew and grew and grew. It's been 63% year on year growth. It started when I first got involved in the industry. It was around about $5 million market cap, and they were trying to get all the exchanges to use it. Now it's $214 billion. But the volume is what's important right now. Now, some of it could be wash trading, and you can't trust various exchanges. But as all of the exchanges are pretty much registered with regulators, and wash trading is kind of wiping out in the early days, the transfer volume between these stable coins is now $35 trillion. $35 trillion. That is up 115% year on year growth. That means that stable coins now settle more than Visa. Now, in stable coins, you have larger transactions as well, because it's trivial to send hundreds of millions at the same time as sending $10 as well. But the point is, the amount of volume is now bigger than Visa, which is why Visa is now co-opting the different companies in order to partner and make sure that they're adjusting their business model before they get disrupted through this new stablecoin standard that the Trump administration is delivering and should be on his desk in the next couple of months. And so companies like Stripe, which have essentially a Silicon Valley company, which had created through APIs easy ways of accepting card payments online, they're doing a partnership with Visa and they're creating a bridge. And they've acquired a company called Bridge for about $1.1 billion, even though it's only done about less than $10 million in revenue. That's because they're going to be moving to this stablecoin standard, which allows all of the tech companies using Stripe to be able to trivially go from stablecoin to Bitcoin through these API rails and merchant processors. Another one, MoonPay. MoonPay just acquired basically for about 100, a company called Iron, and that was for, about $100 million or so. And so MoonPay does a lot of crypto. It's more like crypto native, and they're launching their own stable coins. And then from the legacy financial system, Bank of America, remember the Bank of America that blockaded Julian Assange when he launched WikiLeaks that was protected by Bitcoin? Well, now they've capitulated and they're getting into stable coins as well. Now that, of course, Operation Choke Point 2.0 happened in 2022, where the Federal Reserve and the SEC co-opted agents like SBF and Alex Mashinsky, crashed the system, wiped out the crypto-friendly banks like Signature, Silicon Valley Bank, and Silvergate, and then approved the BlackRock ETF so that they could then get all of their buddies into Bitcoin while they shift the world order, knowing that all of the central banks are purchasing more gold. All of the TradFi, traditional financial institutions, global capital that have accounts with BlackRock, they're into Bitcoin. And then they can prepare for the Trump administration, implant Trump, transition to this very disruptive environment that we're going through right now that shrinks America into a regional power so that they can get the whole artificial intelligence and robotics in place while the global finance diversifies into the Middle Eastern bloc, the BRICS bloc, and the various other regions. And I'll cover more of that in macro to help you understand the Trump tariffs when you follow the money. Well, anyway, Bank of America is planning to own their own stablecoin. A company I was an early investor in many years ago called Circle, they announced that they're doing their pre-IPO rounds now. So they're going to be looking to go public. And I think they're releasing the docs maybe by the end of this month. That might change as a result of the correction in the stock market. And maybe they want to be public before the bills go through but probably private equity wants to, they want to try and the pre-IPO tends to do a lot better than the actual IPO. It's like a transfer of wealth from the venture capitalists and the people that invested in private equity like myself. I don't write the rules. I was just trying to support the industry, but capital takes over. They tend to get the best price, get the right timing, sell it to retail. And then like the Coinbase, which I was an early investor in, they were doing the pre-IPO at about 100 billion. And then it corrected to about 30 billion and all the retail lose their money. And the wealthy private equity do that. They engineer the system through co-opting the investment banks and overvaluing. But anyway, whatever happens with Circle, we might get that. Pre-IPO transactions are now happening. Essentially, Circle's now, which is one of the second largest stablecoin issuer. Tether co-opted Howard Lutnick from Cantor Fitzgerald. Cantor Fitzgerald became a shareholder in Tether and started custodying some of the treasuries. And so he got Tether a seat at the table around the White House. Obviously, Brad Garlinghouse, also I was a long time ago, I invested in a company called Ripple Labs. I don't own an XRP, but it was a long time ago. They were creating a network where you could have Bitcoin exchanges connected to each other across Africa, Mexico, global South regions. They ended up going into XRP and kind of working with banks in the end. but I invested early. But now, anyway, they paid their way into sitting down with the Trump administration. And that's why everyone's creating XRP ETFs, XRP futures, because he obviously paid to get Trump in power. And so the lobby power is, politicians are just prostitutes for corporate interest, just as CIA was created to execute proof of weapons violence, just as the Federal Reserve was created to extract wealth from the middle class over to special interests using banks. And banks is a slow confiscation of wealth through a debt-based Ponzi scheme based upon rigging the game through the debt drug and the proof of weapons network. And then you have organizations like IMF that export it globally and create terrorism all around the world that fund these and subdivert these different groups. And then they use that in order to fund the media so that they create these strategic tensions between Republican, Democrats, Labor, Conservative, so that you're always distracted, turning over your politician every 4 years based upon the narrative of the media where they say the left is doing this, the right's doing that. And then you're distracted when they have co-opted both sides and the system just carries on decade after decade, extracting wealth just as it is under the current administration as well, when we go through the macro section. But they always want you to believe that this time is different, of course, as well. But anyway, the one that paid the big bucks to the Trump administration, they essentially get to, they get their cut of the future of the dollar as we transition to this stablecoin standard. Trump also has carved out a slice of the future of the dollar for his family. So immediately, him and Steve Witkoff was an investor in World Liberty Financial, which is his family, and his family are positioning himself for this new stablecoin standard, Bitcoin standard. And as I always said, follow the money. If you want to get ahead of it, stop listening to what politicians say. All they do is lie, and start looking at what their money is doing, reposition around that, and understand that we're transitioning to a world of Bitcoin AI and CBDCs, and get yourself on the right side of the change, because then you can have more economic power to influence those on the wrong side of the change that need your help. And that's kind of what I've always been doing for the last 14 years, and why I still give Bitcoin Hard Talk episodes, even though Bitcoin blessed me with being able to free myself from all corrupted agendas, and because it supported my company, it supported me, and took me to a place I never imagined was possible, thanks to the maths and code. And anyway, World Liberty Financial, they're basically announced they're launching USD1. That is the Trump family slice of the dollar, in order to get their last asset stripping of debt as you roll over the Ponzi scheme, get these stablecoin issuers, and get the super subsidy that goes to the fractional reserve banks and transfer it over to those that have technical companies. So that would be the Trump-backed stablecoin. What else did we get? As I said, Steve Witkoff positioned himself by becoming a shareholder. So all of the people that are transitioning into this world, are all benefiting from this new transition. So just follow the money. And what is Steve Witkoff? He's the new envoy to the Middle East, and he's negotiating what I'll cover in the geopolitical section, the new era in the Middle East. And obviously, Trump has massive investments through his family, through the funds that are Saudi funded, and many of that is investing in the other regions as well. Because all of these, they kind of put America MAGA labels and clothes on a globalist agenda to be fully diversified, and that tricks a lot of people. Follow the money and you can stop the tricks. Well, anyway, Steve Witkoff, envoy for the Middle East, negotiating the future of artificial intelligence and energy in the region, and he will be a shareholder in World Liberty Financial alongside the Trump family. Basically, as I said, the president is giving his family programmable power. This is the important side to understand. Whereas in Europe, we're giving it to an unelected European Union and the European Central Bank that is absolutely shafting Europeans by handing over money based upon USAID funded BBC and media to create narratives like Putin is Hitler, to make us put Ukrainian flags and think we're defending democracy, when they're actually just asset stripping all of the assets out of Ukraine asset stripping all of the Europeans, handing over the money that's being printed, shafting inflation onto those that don't have Bitcoin. They're getting poorer and poorer and poorer while they essentially kill Ukrainians and kill Russians and sacrifice them and make you think that you're the ethical people, while the proof of weapons network, the mafia network, just creates more death and destruction. And in the end, they negotiate the asset stripping of Ukraine. America gets a chunk of the rare earth minerals. Europe gets their chunk. They get to stimulate an economy based upon war, print, take $350 billion of Putin's money, 800 billion euros, print that, make Europeans smaller, and put those into military contractors where they own the shares as well. And so anyway, they are looking, these stablecoin providers are looking for programmatic power, because the stablecoin, rather than having the central bank, will hand over to the issuers of stablecoins in America. You know how you always had the Federal Reserve fake capitalism system competing with the engineered communist system through the Soviet Union? You create that strategic tension, and you have trillions and trillions of dollars of profits from war after war after war, where you fund both sides. That's exactly what happened. The latest one was the fake war on terror, kind of the Iran-Israel tension. We'll cover more. But now you're getting the stablecoin CBDC tension. The strategy is always the same. Once you recognize it, it's so easy to do. Also, another company I invested in was the largest Bitcoin exchange in Mexico, Bitso. They're creating a peso stablecoin, and that's going to be on a different chain. We also got announcements that Custodia X. Now, remember when the company I co-founded, Bank to the Future, when it first started, we tried to create a full reserve bank. The Bank of England shut it down and said you have to build on top of Barclays. A similar story, Custodia tried to build on top of the Federal Reserve System and give people full reserve bank accounts. In the Biden administration, Operation Choke Point 2.0 shut that down. But in the Trump administration, now we're moving to this stablecoin standard. Custodia X is getting Vantage through Vantage Bank, is getting the first bank-issued stablecoins under a Wyoming charter as well. So they're creating lots of different models. Fidelity, one of the large fund managers, they're getting a tokenized money market fund on top of Ethereum. So basically taking a security that diversifies across these debt instruments and putting them into a fund by pooling together all of the pensioners' money. They get their cut on top of that. Then they build a stable coin on top of it that backs it. And then they get to take the debt-based Ponzi scheme, roll it over into everybody that has Fidelity accounts. So while those de-dollarizing are divesting from treasuries, the bag holders become the everyday American people, the pensions. And if you can allow them to programmatically convert the yield into Bitcoin, they could survive it. But instead, they're making sure that the issuers get to do what Tether does, which is you take the yield and buy Bitcoin, but they're trying to make it so they're protected rather than the people being protected. Of course, Galaxy X, DWS, they're creating a Euro stablecoin. And so they're looking for the competing models within the MiCA regulations. After settling with the Department of Justice, Mike Novogratz, who created a fake or was a large pump and dumper in Do Kwon's fake Terra Luna Ponzi scheme, where he said it was a $60 billion Ponzi scheme, where he said, we're creating decentralized central banking through Terra Luna. It was propped up by a shitcoin money printer fiat currency token. And when the token crashed, it led to having to sell down a bunch of Bitcoin, crash the whole Ponzi scheme. And one of the people that benefited from it was Mike Novogratz from Galaxy Digital, where he just paid a $200 million fine. And now he gets to play his role in getting a chunk of the stable coins with the financial terrorists at the European Union and European Central Bank. Now, the states are also getting in as well. Wyoming, which Caitlin Long from Custodia had worked with in order to create regulations around attacking the fractional reserve banking system, the state has come along and saying, we're going to do state banking again. This is very interesting. Before the Federal Reserve System, before the first central bank, the second central bank, the invasion by Europeans in order to co-opt the constitution, and replace it with communism on chain, which was always the methodology of perpetuating the proof of weapons network by going around the world and debasing people's currencies, then using organizations like the IMF to get them addicted to debt, and then making them go through radical changes and installing a member bank for the Bank for International Settlements and the economic hitmen that were designed in order to do that. Before those systems, between those systems, America had a state banking system. Well, Wyoming is bringing it back. WYST is looking to launch in July, which kind of looks like a state-run CBDC, but actually done by the state. It is a very different mechanism. And what else? What else is happening? In the last 2 weeks, Sam Altman, the creator of ChatGPT, intelligence technology, you get all of these entrepreneurs in America that essentially are intelligence assets. They create the technology using the military industrial complex. They're used in order to perpetuate it across retail so that we all have to opt into that technology. And Sam Altman launched WorldCoin, which was going around the world, taking the global south countries, getting them to put their iris data, scan it into an eyeball, which becomes their digital ID, and then combine that with artificial intelligence. Well, now Sam Altman's WorldCoin is now talking to Visa in order to create their stablecoin. And of course, Elon Musk is merging X. Now he's got car data. He's got social data through X. He's got Grok, which is XAI. Now he gets to combine it all with Doge. He got all the data from auditing all the different areas of government, whether it be the Pentagon, whether it be USAID and those criminal networks and financial terrorist organizations. He got to be the hero and say Doge is taking out the deep state. But now he gets in exchange the Stablecoin Standard. And really, because he paid the highest price to Trump in order to install Trump as president, he gets to have the social credit score that will power it all, and he gets to be the programmatic winner of, or get the biggest head start, while the 2-year special grace period is given to the decentralizations. But of course, he had to co-opt into the proof of weapons network, and he had to do that in partnership with Visa. So those deals are all being done in the background. Stablecoin on Visa. Visa's perpetuating it across the different systems, and they're making sure that they get their cut. Now, what did Elon Musk come out and say? Well, he said, there was a video I shared on my X. He said, if done right, X would become half of the global financial system. So he has huge aspirations, but this is a front man for military industrial complex technology. He was given NASA's technology. He was able to take Tesla and wipe out the shares of the founder and become the founder. He exited the PayPal mafia, which is with Peter Thiel. Peter Thiel's the creator of Palantir. Palantir is creating all the AI technology for doing all the wars with the governments through what's being beta tested in Gaza, genocide as a service. All of these people, they give the backdoors to the NSA, as Snowden told us. As Zuckerberg will, he had to capitulate to the Trump administration. And basically, you get your cut of this stablecoin standard, because it is a stablecoins arms race. Who is in charge right now? Who is the winner? Well, Tether was the #1 enemy. But obviously now Howard Lutnick is able to get his share in that. So he's representing Tether, and now Tether is still completely dominating as well. But we're getting kind of the integration of Tether into the US system, when before it was the enemy of the system, because obviously through this network, through Howard Lutnick, through the proof of weapons network, you're able to pay your way into the mafia network as well. So now all of a sudden they can get their audit. So they're in talks with the Big Four in America, the Big Four auditors that sign off on many, many problematic things, but you get to, get the stamp of approval there, because they've now got enough money, because Bitcoin essentially filled any holes that happened when the governments actually seized some of those bank accounts when they were an enemy of the US. Now they're a friend of the US. They filled that hole with Bitcoin. and now they get to be a part of the future of the dollar. The CEO of Tether, Paolo, he now said that they're going to have 200 million. They've got 200 million users right now, and they're aiming for 400 million users. They're going for billions of users by the time you integrate it with these social networks and Facebook and various other things, which was originally what they tried to do with Libra. But then the European, under that administration, they weren't ready for that because not enough people owned Bitcoin in the traditional network. And so they had to delay it till today. They're also they're playing on the censorship play as well. YouTube used to give me a lot of traffic. I got almost to 100,000 subscribers, and they started censoring me as I revealed these things. Now the administration takes the things that they used to censor me for because they would call them conspiracy theory, and USAID actually reveals everything. And now they're giving me freedom of speech, but not freedom of reach. So please subscribe, like, share. I rely on you. Put a comment in below. But anyway, we're hedging into Rumble, and now Tether made a strategic investment in Rumble, and the Rumble creator monetization is going to be done using Tether. Now, Tether is, out of all countries, in an environment of de-dollarization. Now, this compared to other countries, the 7th largest buyer of US debt in 2024. And this is what it's about. And this is a subtle detail you need to understand. This is how do we know that we have a tool to fight back, or do we just take the fractional reserve banking system and replace one evil with another email as everybody's cheering on MAGA saying we're winning, we're winning, we're winning? Essentially, the model of Tether bought 8,888 Bitcoin for approximately $735 million in Q1 2025 alone, just by giving people a digital dollar and buying treasuries, which is taking the debt-based Ponzi scheme that they're rolling over. America has to roll over $9 trillion. You then get the yield from that system, which is perpetuated based upon being able to sell more treasuries. And so you hand over that to the stablecoin issuers, and now you've got a new market to be able to roll over the Ponzi scheme. So based upon that, everybody wants to do what Tether is doing. Trump administration wants to do it. X wants to do it. All of the different players. Visa wants to do it. They want to essentially asset strip the dollar system, take the yield, buy Bitcoin, so that they can then hand over the Bitcoin across globalists. BlackRock can then hedge against the American system while they move to their transition and turn America, which I'll go through in the macro section, into essentially an AI and robotics technocracy based upon the New World Order and the new, the wealthy people taking the money that they clipped off America, which was paid for by middle-class Europeans and Americans, and invested into assets across China to BRICS and the Middle East as well. And then that money was reinvested in order to prop up and perpetuate this scheme by combining a debt-based Ponzi scheme with the world capital markets. So if you take Tether alone right now, Tether hodls just through the US government special subsidy, full reserve banking, they've managed to get themselves a position of 100,521 Bitcoin worth approximately $8.3 billion. And the US government, which is holding about 100,000 Bitcoin, will be returned back to Bitfinex shareholders, which is a sister company of Tether. I was a shareholder in Bitfinex because we supported them when that hack happened to help victims of the hack. Those funds have come back anyway, they get 100,000 Bitcoin based upon that. This is essentially basically asset stripping the remnants of the Ponzi scheme and using stable coins in order to construct financial products, which takes money out of the fiat currency system, hacks it, and creates Bitcoin wealth for those that are able to understand the game. This is what I want you to understand. I want you to be on the right side of this trend. I don't want you to be waving a MAGA flag and be on the wrong side of the trend because you think they're going to hollow out the middle class when all they're doing is handing out assets and asset stripping. And I want people to understand that. And that's a goal that I'd like. Look, maybe they do. Maybe they do what they say they're going to do. The money says no. But if they do, great. But at least prepare for the worst, because I don't trust politicians. I definitely trust Bitcoin. Why do I trust Bitcoin? Because it's backed by 800 exahashes of energy with no human, with maths and code that no one can change. So anyway, last year, Tether were more profitable than Citibank. This is now outstripping fractional reserve banking. There is more money in issuing stable coins and buying Bitcoin than there is in owning and controlling credit and being able to create the digital dollar. So what do you think banks want to do? They want a piece of where the profits are. They also want to hedge. And that's why there was the controlled demolition. And there was BlackRock, one of the global controllers of capital that I talked about in the Proof of Weapons network. They're getting all of their buddies into Bitcoin. And you know, crashing markets, so you sell your Bitcoin in panic, is happy for them because they're buying your Bitcoin and they want to buy it at cheaper because they missed the boat. And they know that there is a global recollaboration of the economy. And what is Citibank doing right now? Citibank is calling the Fed because they need rates to be lower. There was a meeting with Jerome Powell today. He said in the Q&A, we speak with all the banks. It's their shareholders. Citibank is a shareholder in the Federal Reserve System. And so they get to call the banks and say, we need rates to be lower. This debt-based Ponzi scheme needs to come down. You can't control inflation. You need to confiscate more from the middle class because we're over-leveraged and we need you to put rates down right now. Citibank, the European Central Bank, is calling the Federal Reserve because they're both shareholders. The same banks are shareholders in the Bank for International Settlements. The 157 central banks that have to bow down to the violence. And Europe is basically, they're not even pretending anymore. Why? Because it's a beta test to manufacture consent. We're going to send all of our money over for weapons and military contractors, and you will be happy. You will own nothing and be happy. World Economic Forum, they are beta testing manufacturing consent right now, and you are doing it. Why? Because that is how the system is working. In fact, they use different regulators as well. BaFin, the Germany regulator, they just blocked a USDE. So they're saying America can have the stable coins, but Europeans can't. So let's see, can Galaxy Digital do it? Because they just settled after being involved in a pump and dump? We shall see. But in Europe, they're using the German regulators in order to block stable coins because they want to launch the digital euro first. They created MiCA regulations. These rules are to ensure that there are no competition to the euro and they can time it. Will they allow the European stablecoin to go? What did Tether do? Tether said, we can't comply with that. We're going to not do that. And so they decided to focus on the dollar because with the dollar, you can bribe the politicians, the prostitutes, and get your cut of the future of the dollar and asset strip it with Bitcoin. So Europe wants full CBDC control when you follow the money. And so they're beta testing the digital euro in October, as we covered. So anyway, remember, we need to make sure that you understand self-custody, you understand Bitcoin, you get the benefit from that rather than giving it to the stablecoin issuers. Your wallets, they want your wallets, they want your behavior, they want your spending patterns, they want all of the programmatic control, all of your social data, so that in real time they can say if they want to do an operation, they can literally shut off your money, negative interest rate your behavior, full command and control, either to the technocrat, the central banksters in Europe, or in the US model, basically the back doors, the over operation, you know, overtly do a CBDC in Europe, but covertly do it through NSA backdoor into CIA, into the central bank at the very top. And so, you know, this is where, what is the lobbies fighting for right now? Well, Senator, let me make sure I get the right name here. Gillibrand, the Department of New York, he said in these stablecoin bills that they want to ban yield-bearing stablecoins to protect the banks. What is the power of the fractional reserve system? It is a monopoly into the Federal Reserve System. They want the yield because they can borrow and they can take out the debt-based Ponzi scheme from Treasury, and they get to charge on top, and they get to get the clip. If you issue a stablecoin backed by treasuries direct from Treasury, and you can pass on that yield like the beta test stablecoins have had right now, then why would you ever have a savings product at a bank when you could actually have a digital dollar that is programmatically through your own wallet convertible into Bitcoin through the yield? You wipe out the fractional reserve model. So of course the banks are lobbying for it. They want to control the stable coins, and they want to keep their special subsidy so that they can keep the Ponzi scheme going of wiping out middle-class America and being closer to the Federal Reserve System to get the 0% interest rate money, so that then they can convert their yield into Bitcoin and not you. If you win that battle, that is a controlled demolition of the fractional reserve system. This is a giant leap forward, because what they are doing by keeping the yield is perpetuating crony capitalism, fake capitalism based upon a debt-based Ponzi scheme of the Federal Reserve and the shareholding banks of the Federal Reserve. They know that a stable coin that can pay yield, that is the biggest attack to their model. And what do the technocrats want? The technocrats want to keep the yield as well. They want to asset strip America in this transition, and they want to do it. Why? They're backed by global capital as well. Global capital is invested across BRICS, across the global south, across the Middle Eastern regions. It is UAE, Qatari, Saudi, Emirati money that is invested in these people. And so they're using their financial control of capital in order to exert influence over these implants. They get to get rich at the same time, and you just need to understand the psyop and not fall for the politicians that are essentially paid as prostitutes to put the narrative that makes it acceptable to Europeans, Americans, and other regions in order to manufacture consent for this wealth confiscation. Don't rely on them. I mean, if they do the right thing, great. But the system is engineered. They don't even know who they work for half the time. Their boss is funded by another boss, and their boss sits at the top, and it comes down through the proof of weapons network, as I covered in previous videos. And then they lobby and bribe politicians. So who did the banking lobby bribe? Elizabeth Warren was the infamous cartoon character that executed Operation Choke Point 2.0, a Fed policy under Jerome Powell that is sitting there saying all nice, prim, proper, Trump's the crazy person. It's not my job to say that, because he knows he's layer 1 and Trump is layer 3. Layer 3 sits under layer 1. And if you need to eliminate Trump, you bribe them through an Epstein network. You use lobby power, Senate and Congress, or you eliminate through assassination, which is where the intelligence come in, which is executing the vision of layer 1. So Elizabeth Warren, an agent for the banking lobby, is basically saying that stable coins, trying to make it a partisan issue so it doesn't get through. So there are factions of the proof of weapons network is seeing if they can still fight against it. They can keep the special subsidy. But if that doesn't work, then you can hand it over to the technocrats, and they're already shareholders in the technocrats, and they've diversified through managing capital into ensuring that you can give an America First narrative, but you need to look after yourself and understand this transition. They're basically trying to turn the dollar, as I said, into programmatic money controlled by technocrats, powered by artificial intelligence. And Trump is the person that needs to get all the rare earth minerals, the manufacturing base to rebuild robotics within America, the artificial intelligence, and everything that the people that pay for Trump need in order to usher in this technocracy. It's crony capitalism. Don't believe narratives. It is CBDCs, but with tech bros as the issuers, as well as banksters, and they're trying to hold on to the super subsidy. But if not, they're hedging with this subsidy. And if that whole system implodes, they're hedging with the people that they've been siphoning off the wealth to and investing in different regions. These are not America first. Understand, it is still globalism. While America is saying, we're no longer going to globalize, we're going to focus on our own, and you're going to be building it for these people. And you just need to understand the game so that you can get on the right side of the change rather than the wrong side of the change. Stable coins at this point are inevitable. I've been talking about it for years. In 2011, I wrote about transitioning to the debt-based Ponzi scheme. I wrote a book called Bank to the Future, Protect Your Future Before Governments Go Bust. Go to simondixon.com, click that yellow button. You can get a copy of it for free in my Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. And in 2011, I said, eventually the end scheme of communism on a blockchain is that you end up with a digital non-debt-based deleveraging system. And this is it. And this is the transition. So this is inevitable. It's predictable. It's guaranteed when you have a debt-based Ponzi scheme and a credit-based fractional reserve system backing up. And that's why the Bank of England created it in the first place. And there were other iterations of it in the past as well. But the Bank of England was the iteration that we have today. Anyway, they're trying to take over bank deposits and hedging their bets as well. It will replace SWIFT. It will replace bank accounts. It will potentially take out the Fed itself if it needs to. And it will hedge that model and make you think you're winning as you're doing it. Because remember, when an asset is no longer useful for the proof of weapons network, it gets rid of that asset. Just like when I cover in the geopolitical section, Israel, the jurisdiction that was created for much of these criminal networks, I'm not talking about the people, I'm talking about the government and the intelligence, it has outweighed its utility. And I'll go through why that is happening in the geopolitical section. When it outlives its utility, it can go. When the Fed is no longer needed, it can go. You replace it with something else. It is fluid in order to confiscate wealth and hand it over to those on the right side of the proof of weapons network. It's backed up by violence, and we can now peacefully, ethically opt out by owning Bitcoin in self-custody and beat the debt slavery that is the design of the fiat currency proof of weapons network. These stable coins will be used for payments. There'll be QR codes on everybody's device. It is happening. Don't think that this is some crazy thing. This is happening. It's going to exist on proof of stake networks, which is why those proof of stake networks have ETFs, so that BlackRock can accumulate and stake so that they can control the proof of stake networks. This is why we save in Bitcoin, because what we want to do is spend in stable coins because we can't take currency risk in this transition phase, and use the yield by us having the yield to convert it into Bitcoin rather than give the stablecoin issuers the special subsidy. So everybody should be lobbying against that effort, because the technocrats ain't going to do it. They want the Bitcoin subsidy, just like Tether's got it. The banks aren't going to do it. They want the Bitcoin subsidy. And they are deploying the bank power network to ensure that you can't get the yield. There are yield-bearing stablecoins right now. If lawfare can be used to work for consumer protection, the yield will be passed on to the consumer. Boom. We are in that peaceful transition. We don't need all the violence, and we can manage a peaceful transition and save in Bitcoin. The countries that want to protect themselves, they can use the same strategy. I'll go through some of the tools that were being presented to people as well. But never forget, don't forget that they will want to weaponize it, which is why you limit your exposure to it. It will eventually be run by artificial intelligence. It'll be linked to a digital ID, and it will be priced in surveillance, which is being beta tested on Europe and will come to America as well. So what are the companies doing to protect themselves? Well, I believe that there is a company, and you know my theory. My theory is that MicroStrategy, now called Strategy, has become important enough to the proof of weapons network that it is building a fiat currency nightmare to accumulate as much Bitcoin as possible. and it has now accumulated 500 Bitcoin, so that if the Fed or if the Proof of Weapons Network ever wanted to control demolition it through controlling the fiat currency network, or the technocrats want to do it through their AI, then you can create a correction in the market that creates a leverage type of situation that leads to some kind of event that can be nationalized, and the government can, like they did in 33 with the over leveraging, investing through the stock market, the bucket shops, over leverage a system, control rates, control demolition, go into the Great Depression, and then FDR confiscated all of the gold off the American people. Here's a neo way of doing it via Bitcoin when Bitcoin becomes a strategic asset. And so understand that. I believe that MicroStrategy, or now called Strategy, because it this week just announced that it has now acquired another 22,048 Bitcoin worth $1.92 billion at an average price of 86,969 per Bitcoin into the correction, and now holds 528,184 Bitcoin, and is coming up with ever more complex cap table and exotic instruments in order to support companies that want to transition into a Bitcoin treasury. And they're even creating, as I said last week, ETFs that will invest in all of them. So your pension has to invest in ETFs. BlackRock then says, you have to go here. Those ETFs then have to invest in these different products. And then they have to invest in the companies that are doing treasuries. And then they can have this mechanism. And all you have to do is protect yourself by owning in self-custody. That's a good thing. So what other companies are doing it? Now, the Indian companies, now that the Indian company has done kind of the final back and forth, we had the China back and forth, we had the Indian back and forth. Now they're recognizing, because the game theory of America saying it's going to do a revenue neutral Bitcoin strategic reserve, all of the countries are recognizing we need to adjust to this new reality. So there are public companies in India now, one of them called Jet King, sorry if I'm saying that. They're now raising money to purchase Bitcoin, and they're doing a beta test, just like we had the beta test in Japan, in India, in Hong Kong, based upon strategy, setting up the beta test. Then we'll have ETFs that can invest in it. There is no stopping this train. And so what is the Trump family doing? Well, they're taking organizations like Hut 8, which engage in infrastructure for Bitcoin mining. And they said, give us a new subsidiary. We'll put our brand on it. You give us a bunch of Bitcoin mining, and we'll create the largest American mining company. The Trump administration says, Hut 8, partner with us, Eric Trump, and American data centers across the region, and we will launch American BTC. We'll put American BTC caps on, and they will start. These are alignment of interests. All you need to do is stop listening to them and see what they're actually doing and follow the money, and you can get through this. So now American BTC is aiming to becoming the world's largest and most efficient pure play miner. How are they going to do that? Crash the price of oil, get natural gas down, wipe out some of the oil manufacturers that can't do it, have allegiances with the cheaper manufacturers, i.e. the Middle East. You may not even be creating an independent base. You don't even know. This is asset stripping. Maybe the price of oil allows the oil manufacturers within America to stay and survive, but please hedge. If Trump's stated goal is to get the price of oil down, to get the price of gas down, to cartel inflation, then what are the oil manufacturers, the drill baby drills, going to be able to do? They're going to go bankrupt. That's why allegiances are being formed with the Middle Eastern region, because maybe they're not going to be oil dependent. I've got no idea what they're exactly going to do. I just need to follow the money, look at the price of oil, do the maths, recognize that America cannot produce at the cheap rate that OPEC can. So therefore, Trump needs to form alliances with who? Putin, MBS. So now the narrative then works in, says, oh, Putin is no longer Hitler, by the way. We need to work with our allies. What does that mean for American manufacturers? It's all you need to do is follow the flows. It's fluid. Things go wrong, but you just got to follow the flows, not listen to what they're saying, and then you can get ahead of the system. Anyway, so what are they going to be doing? They said they're going to be building a robust Bitcoin strategic reserve within the new subsidiary of Hut 8 that is owned partially by the Trump family. And so they can get their free Bitcoin mining position and they can adjust it. The global capital providers around the world are all hedging against the dollar and buying Bitcoin. The central banks are all buying up gold and hedging against the dollar. The Trump tariffs are driving a regional superpower and artificial intelligence power in order to give the technocrats what they need to usher in this change. This is not about middle-class America. It is the same system dressed up in a different. It is a transition because so much money was taken from middle-class America and Europeans and invested in the countries that were actually investing in their people. China was building out massive infrastructure. China was investing in global South when America was blowing them up. You know, and that is why these new allegiances have been formed. And so who's the next company on the public stock market that's going to play the fiat currency system and get into Bitcoin? GameStop. Who's GameStop? GME. GME was a company that was speculative attacked by a massive member Citadel of the proof of weapons network that does corporate raiding through shorting, through controlling capital at cheap rates. They can borrow from the Bank of Japan if they want at 0%, hedge out the currency exposure, and then they get to use and launch speculative attacks by shorting companies, wipe out retail that want to sell, do naked shorting, and then they get to take out companies. And there was an attack against it by retail that was able to use Robinhood, a company that I invested in, that eventually went public. And then there was a whole investigation with the SEC, why they put off the bid. Were they doing it for Citadel? Were they doing it for the SEC? You know, who knows? That investigation happened. But this company now ends up with about $4 billion of capital and is now raising capital in order to buy Bitcoin after meeting Michael Saylor to do the Treasury Bitcoin reserve asset and taking a company that has these reserves and essentially creating a new model rather than going into Chapter 11, rather than restructuring where lawyers get to steal all the money. You can now transition through Michael Saylor into turning it into a Bitcoin treasury company. And then maybe you can take that and do SPACs where you reverse merge other companies that now have these Bitcoin positions. And you can now save the company into a zombie company using Bitcoin. The shareholders don't have to go through the asset stripping. And you can do a better model. You know, this is what happens when you create hard money. You actually get a reversing of the asset stripping predatory model of those that can borrow from the debt-based Ponzi scheme. And instead, you get to take those very same zombie companies, save them with Bitcoin, and create a new future for somebody that needs to shell public company with a Bitcoin treasury reserve. This is the beauty of changing time preference and utilizing at the corporate level. So GME, GameStop, was up about 15% just upon the announcement. Now, obviously, it corrected with the stock market because of the Trump tariffs that we'll be covering. But GameStop has now raised $1.48 billion just before the correction. And it's now got $6.08 billion in order to acquire Bitcoin and develop their treasury strategy. They can join the Bitwise Treasury ETF, which is all the public companies using debt-based instruments in order to wipe out those, you know, in order to play the arbitrage between fiat currency and Bitcoin. And it can become a strategic company in case America wants to use the Federal Reserve to hike or crash rates and then nationalize it and end up with that Bitcoin as well as the dollar system potentially capitulates. It's all about hedging. So what did Trump do? Trump Media then signs an agreement with a partner with a Chinese company called Crypto.com. It has a subsidiary in America, but it was launched from China in order to launch Bitcoin ETFs so that they can get their cut from Bitcoin. What else did the Trump administration do? It signed an executive order to empower U.S. Treasury, not the Federal Reserve, U.S. Treasury, to modernize the payment system. So basically, it's saying, it frames it as narrative, which is, oh, we're stamping out corruption and we're going to give everybody $5,000, the subsidy from what we change at Doge. Elon gets all of his data. And you get to do an executive order saying that, right, we need to do the monetary system. What's it going to pay with? Trump stablecoin, Elon stablecoin, the Mellon family stablecoin. Anyway, what does Trump say? The executive order is to reduce fraud. So upgrading the Treasury payment system, no, it's in order to transition to the Stablecoin Standard. They'll say to you, reduce fraud, reduce waste, reduce abuse. But here's how you know whether they're real and out for the American people. Will they allow you to get the yield and convert it into Bitcoin, or will they take the subsidy? Because if they take the subsidy, they're just essentially asset stripping America, repurposing the Ponzi scheme, and wiping out middle-class America so they can take as much Bitcoin out of the system. Follow the money, you can understand what's happening. Then you know whether it is MAGA, whether it's real or not. MAGA means that you get the yield and you get to convert it into Bitcoin. So what about the regulators? So we have the OCC. They're doing their lobby under the Fed. Well, there's the smaller banks. The smaller banks are regulated by FDIC. These are the ones where they could just wipe you out. This wiped out Silicon Valley Bank. They took over your bank in a weekend, and then they hand you over to the too big to fail banks, and then you end up in JP Morgan, just like they did during the 2022, Silicon Valley Bank wipeout and Signature and Silvergate. FDIC has come out, and what they're doing, they said, we're revising the banks, and we're now allowing banks to engage in crypto related activities. And you don't need to ask FDIC for permission. So this is the free banking era that we talked about. Will they keep the yield? Will they pass on the yield? That is the key question. That is the number one question of whether you know that this is going to be an attack on the system and they're doing it for middle-class Americans, or whether they're doing it for themselves. That's how you know. You've got to have these key things where you understand so that you don't fall for their narratives. BlackRock is launching a Bitcoin exchange traded product in Europe. So wash, rinse, repeat. Beta test was America. You basically get BlackRock ETF in Europe. BlackRock then gets all of its buddies in Europe, all of its banksters, all of its proof of weapons network, gets them all in. Then the regulations come out, and then you have holding down of the system. And then you have the original agenda as well. So BlackRock is getting all of its clients into Bitcoin in Europe, while it is pushing a narrative. What is BlackRock saying? So he's a key, Larry Fink is a key player on the proof of weapons network. BlackRock is pushing a narrative that Bitcoin is replacing the US dollar as reserve. He's saying that narrative for a reason, because he's invested in all the other regions as well. BlackRock's not America first. You might think it is, just because it's tradable on the US stock market. But look at its balance sheet. Look at its assets. It is fully diversified. It's a global financial institution on the proof of weapons network. The proof of weapons network is to asset strip companies, wipe out the middle class in order to use central banking and intelligence operations to make sure that they wipe out the money from you. And now when they go into the adjustment process, the central banks buy gold and the buddies buy Bitcoin, and they transition to the New World Order. Right. One thing that was very interesting as well, one of the pieces of the fund managers on the network came out and said, how does America protect itself in this environment? There was a speech that came out, very interesting. And essentially it was from a fund manager, and they said that US, I don't know if he was a fund manager or an investment bankster that constructs projects. But he basically said US could fund Bitcoin buys with a $2 trillion bit bond. Now, we launched in 2014 the first bit bonds. We launched the first Bitcoin, Bank to the Future, launched the first Bitcoin VC funds. And we backed them by mining as well. And we created retirement Bitcoin products as well. The BitBond brand has come back now by TradFi. And so TradFi wants to launch a $2 trillion BitBond, and it's by a financial institution called New Market. And the CEO came out and gave a presentation, a very interesting presentation. What it said is that you could raise finance through a bond, through a traditional financial market bond, just like the Treasury strategy for companies like Strategy, but you could do it at the government Treasury level. And so you can dedicate, essentially, you take a bond, you do a fundraise, you raise $2 trillion, and you dedicate 10% of the issuant proceeds to buying Bitcoin. So of a $2 trillion raise, it would be $200 billion of the $2 trillion that goes out and buys Bitcoin in the market. You purchase the Bitcoin, and then the remaining 90% is used in order to fund regular government which basically means roll over the debt-based Ponzi scheme. They never invest in US infrastructure. They transfer the money back to the banking lobby, the big pharma lobby, the military industrial complex, their war operations like Israel lobby in the Middle East, which is no longer useful based upon what we'll be covering in the geopolitical macro section. But essentially, governments can continue the Ponzi scheme, and they can asset strip Bitcoin out of the process as they're doing it as well. And so essentially, this socializes Bitcoin upside. So this is an interesting strategy. It keeps the debt-based Ponzi scheme for longer, but it also gives everyday Americans that their pensions invest in these products some of the upside of Bitcoin. Again, a peaceful transition rather than a sudden transition. But basically, the bonds would pay a lower current interest rate. So he suggested 1% on the first 10 years. So now, while you restructure the debt, you replace it with 1% bonds that has 10% allocated to Bitcoin. Now you've reduced the rate down to 1% if you do this strategy. And you offset the final payout to bondholders by giving them some guaranteed annualized return of about 4.5%. But also on top of that, that's on a senior basis, you share the BTC price rise. So the appreciation goes to the issuer, Treasury, and 50% of it stays with the issuer, and 50% goes to the upside. Now, he did some estimations based upon the previous upside of Bitcoin, where if you can guarantee the 4.5%, only pay 1% for the next 10 years, you can get the type of Bitcoin upside that has happened. Then you can, you can essentially get the upside and share that with the pension companies that buy that, which obviously BlackRock will control, and the various other components of the proof of weapons network. And basically, the government would end up retaining half of the gains. And he gave some examples. And basically, after accounting for the $200 billion purchase of Bitcoin, based upon the previous returns, he calculated that there would be a net present value saving of $354 billion in this $200 trillion asset. It could be structured as revenue neutral, which means it doesn't need to go by Congress based upon the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Executive Order that Trump has already put in place, which means you could reprice gold, sell some of the gold, and buy and issue these treasuries and use that to buy some Bitcoin. It could be done revenue neutral as per the Bitcoin Strategic Reserve Executive Order. But the overall tax cost to taxpayers would be completely offset by the lower interest rate. So he's worked through that. He argued that essentially this might be able to be used to reduce the 10-year rate. The 10-year rate is the rate that the Fed doesn't control, the price of government borrowing, for 10 years. That reduces it down to 1% for that tranche of the issuance. This could essentially bring down the borrowing cost for mortgages using a similar product. He argues that it would bring down the cost for auto loans for small businesses that need to gain access to finance as stable coins transition to helicopter money to get universal basic income based upon the savings to transition to a technocracy so you can get 350 million Americans to adopt it so Elon can implement his social credit score, so that you can have people cheering on because they got America, the Fed got America into $37 trillion of debt. So he argues that essentially this is for everyday Americans to build wealth using Bitcoin, using bit bonds. This is essentially the only real solution for how to create a competing asset to the debt. Because remember, the Federal Reserve System, the dollar is debt. You can't pay down the $37 trillion of debt. You can only roll it over. So you have to roll it over into assets that might appreciate more than the Federal Reserve System. It's probably the only strategy that can be used in order to actually create something that might be able to restructure this in a controlled demolition. So what have we covered today in This Week in Bitcoin? Stable coins, if they pass on the yield, can give everyday Americans the opportunity to protect themselves from the proof of weapons network. Public companies can use, and private companies could use the same strategy of the Bitcoin treasury strategy in order to make sure you don't get wiped out as the debt-based Ponzi scheme rolls over. And treasury can do the same as it's engaging in these battles through Brit bonds. There are three strategies: individuals, corporations, and government, if they want to go through a controlled demolition. Will the Federal Reserve Proof of Weapons Network allow that to happen? Well, let's look through and follow the money of the Trump administration and understand what these damn tariffs are all about. I could be wrong, I could be right, but I follow the money and I will adjust each week based upon what the evidence shows me. So now we're going to move into part 2 this week in macro, and we're going to be covering the Trump tariffs. So do me a favor, if you enjoyed part 1, I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers because YouTube started censoring me, and I want to get a blue tick, which you can only get. I don't want a blue chick, I want a blue tick. I'm a married man. I don't want an avatar. I would like a tick. So that I can then get YouTube to review my account now that everything I've said that they used to censor me for being conspiracy theories can be backed up by evidence. So if you're not a subscriber, if everyone that watches this video went over to my YouTube channel, Simon Dixon, and I'll keep giving this content for free, but if all of you subscribed, I'd get over that 100,000, then I can get that review, then I can get organic traffic, and we can make this shit happen. The more we get the message out, the more they can protect themselves. Just given a strategy for everyday Americans beaten by the Proof of Weapons Network. Everyday corporations beaten by the Proof of Weapons Network. Even Treasury and government in protecting itself when becoming a regional power, rather than getting wiped out and asset stripped like Europe right now. Even the individual European countries can do that. Get this message out there. Companies, countries can protect themselves. I need you support, so that we can actually get real traffic now that I'm being censored. With that in mind, I'm just going to have a little bit of water, and I'm going to go over to This Week in Macro, and in part 3, we're going to do This Week in Geopolitics. We've got a lot to cover because I did 2 weeks. Right. Hit that like button, share right now. 1, 2, 3. Welcome, everybody, to part 2 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 76. We're going to be going through the Trump tariffs and what I think you need to know to not fall for narrative. And again, this one's a bit iffy because Trump is a one hard MF to figure out because he pivots all the time. He puts out strategic different ambiguity. Sometimes he goes off on his own. Sometimes he goes with the strategy. So, you don't know. But this one, all I need to do is follow the money of the Trump administration. Then I can do a forecast and you can decide whether this makes sense in terms of what is actually happening right now. So let's go through what's happening right now. There are 3 explanations that came out this week around Trump tariffs. So if you haven't noticed, $5 trillion was wiped off the stock market. All relationships around America and its allies and its enemies are all being renegotiated. And that is causing a ginormous disruption in the previous post-World War II Bretton Woods world order that took all currencies, took them off the gold standard, traded them against the dollar, The dollar then got all of the gold, a massive chunk of the gold through the Federal Reserve System and backed the dollar by gold. And then as the Federal Reserve got the government deeper into debt through war, death, and destruction, through the proof of weapons network, through the IMF system, the World Bank system, and the Bank for International Settlement global networks of central banks, it eventually defaulted on the gold in 71 and went into the final debt-based Ponzi scheme where you can roll over the Ponzi scheme for as long as people, which wipes out middle-class America and confiscates all assets to the wealthy that can borrow at 0% at the expense of everybody else. Now, to reverse that, you need a new world order. I've covered this in many, many different videos. You can go to my new world order videos, you can study further, or we'll go through what it is right now. Essentially, you need a shock to the system because capital in surplus countries like China, which have a state banking system, so it can't be over leveraged, and reserves, surplus reserves, and a BRICS network that is connected to investing through Belt and Road Initiative, supporting global South countries to rebuild their countries as they're being bombed through the IMF system, has created a network of de-dollarization. Also, through the petrodollar and focusing on their own people, the Middle East has been investing in their own infrastructure. China's been investing in its own infrastructure. They have created a population that now have vast, vast, vast reserves, and they're now more significant, and they get board seats in the proof of weapons network like BlackRock. So now they have economic power to dictate the future. America and Europe have just been wiping their middle class and handing over through crony corruption and using debt slavery in order to hand over all the contracts to the proof of weapons network and the mafia, essentially. And they've created a lot of enemies because they've been using covert regime changes and deliberately enslaving countries and pretending it was for democracy. And so that is the state of affairs right now. So Europe and America are just saying, right, the European state, you're a surveillance state. We've already co-opted you. We took away your sovereignty through European Union. We took away your currencies through the European Central Bank. We're just going to go all in, and there ain't shit you can do about it. We're going to wipe out everything. We're going to do covert operations in order to take out, Europe was big Germany. Germany was a manufacturing country. A manufacturing country required Russia's cheap gas. The America and the CIA, the Fed, blew it up. The ECB said, yeah, we're just going to asset strip the Europeans. We're going to buy American gas, which is 70% more expensive or whatever it is. That's going to create a recession in Europe. And then we're going to hand over the war machine through Zelensky and implant CIA that was executing that operation, where America can asset strip the rare earth minerals. And Europeans can be fooled through the USAID BBC sponsored media that said Putin is Hitler. While America, the CIA, and Putin were essentially weakening Europe, taking out the gas. And now Europe is in recession. And now they're saying, we'll print all the money. We'll get you to send it all to the military contractors. Zelensky can get his cut. We can kill more Ukrainians so that America gets its rare earth minerals. And BlackRock owns 50% of the land anyway. And the UK economy has securitized its land against IMF debt. And we can pay off all the corrupt politicians. And Europeans can just be wiped out. And we can see what we can get away with as we launch a CBDC and put them all on a universal basic income based upon divide and conquer strategies and open borders and fooling them into thinking they all hate each other. So we can create civil unrest. And then we can create the surveillance and tell them to all stay in their homes and be happy. America is doing that through stable coins. You've got the beta test. Now, we're told that there's three stories of what is basically happening right now. Either the Trump administration is just incompetent. So the Democrats and the people that are ideologically aligned with the left, they say, Trump is crazy. It's all incompetence. They don't know what they're doing. That's one ideology. The other is that we have hit peak centralization of the proof of weapons network. And there is a strategy for rolling over the debt. The $9 trillion that needs to be rolled over in America, if you can force the Fed to reduce rates by crashing the economy, and then you can create an environment that gets the 10-year rates down, then you can wipe off $1 trillion of debt refinancing, and then hopefully roll over the economy again and wipe out middle class again. Those that own stocks and real estate are happy, but you essentially create this creative destruction and demolition, and then you roll over the Ponzi scheme, because all of the people that own real estate, they're saying, yeah, we don't care about the middle class. Just get my stocks back, my 401k. Please get my stock price up. Please get my real estate price up. If you don't get it up right now, I'm just about to retire and I was going to buy Bitcoin with it. You can't crash it now. Screw everyone else. Screw them. They all need to be wiped out, but please just get my bit up right now, because I'm enslaved to the system. They're all in debt. There's nothing they can do. You can't crash my stock and help them because it would just be too destructive to the whole thing. And then remember, all dollar is debt. Paying off the debt means you crash the system and then you enter into chaos. So it pits people against each other and it brings out the worst in human behavior, all because it's a debt-based Ponzi scheme. That's why it's a Bitcoin story, because people get to reverse that, as I covered in part 1. So that's the second story. And essentially, this is a shift from the post-World War II Bretton Woods system that has hit peak debt. And now we need to create a new world order, because essentially, and we'll cover this more in the macro section, Russia won the war, European got weakened, new power happened in the Middle East, and BRICS is aligned around that new, and the global financial proof of weapons network is invested in all of them. So now let's asset strip America into an AI and robotics data center, as we are doing with China. And then we get to invest in both using the Middle Eastern money and wealth because they actually built an economy based upon resources. And so those are like the different versions, the 3 different versions. You can take your pick. I'm not quite sure which one it is because it seems to change. But what I do is I dig deep and I follow the money. So let's go into what actually happened this week. So firstly, April the 2nd, 2025 is called by the Trump administration Liberation Day. This is where the narrative has been pushed in a MAGA flag that we're going to bring all our jobs back to America. We recognize that middle class has been shafted by this system. So boomers, you need to suck it up. And somehow we're going to maintain world reserve currency status. And we're going to rebuild. We're going to make the rich richer. And we're going to bring the middle class. And we're going to bring jobs back. And we're just completely going to ignore the reality of Triffin dilemma, which says if you want world reserve currency, you have to have a trade deficit, i.e. what tariffs reverse, and a fiscal deficit, i.e. debt to push dollars out in the world. And therefore, globalism is required because you import goods in order to perpetuate dollars globally. And if you want to reverse that, you have to give up on the world reserve currency. But they're saying, America's saying we can have it all. The Trump administration saying we can have it all, even though it's not possible. So what is the thing anyway? Well, anyway, if you can get as much fiscal debt, which is the old system, and then you can try and get the trade deficit into a surplus and thread that needle, they believe that you can save the debt-based Ponzi scheme and recapitulate the debt-based Ponzi scheme and save the boomers that have all the real estate and assets. And if you can do this impossible mission, there's no choice anyway, because everything was headed to World War III based upon the proof of weapons network. So now Trump is here to deliver that message, and Trump and his cronies are sucking out and asset stripping just in case it goes wrong and saying, have some Bitcoin. And we're going to build a crypto stablecoin side. We're going to try and keep it so we get the Bitcoin, but please, you get some Bitcoin and protect yourself. The ones that don't get Bitcoin in this whole damn thing are going to be the ones on the wrong side, unless Trump is 5G, 6G, 12G, genius, samurai, ninja, and the administration can thread this impossible mission and recorrect the stock market to the exact right level where rates go here and the Fed does this and then global capital does this and they can make America great again and it rebuilds its capitalization base. And now Apple can manufacture iPhones in America and they cost 10 times as much because they're made by Americans and all the components are made in America because they want a booming economy, get everyone's wages up, and think they can tackle inflation at the same time as getting oil prices down and think that their oil drill baby drill companies aren't going to go bankrupt. So apparently the 16,000D chess that the Trump administration has is going to be able to solve that. If they do it, I will give all the credit where it's due. Remember what I said when I said vote Trump. Get the Bitcoin strategy, protect yourself, but knows that here's all the problems. Don't listen to what he says, follow the money. Anyway, so we got the announcement of Liberation Day on the 2nd of April. He says all the right things to get everyone saying, great, I'm going to get my job back. And he's arguing essentially a logical argument that the tariffs are not fair. Everyone's been ripping us off, even though it was the strategy of the world reserve currency and the debt-based Ponzi scheme. We're reversing that. Okay, fine. All right, so we're reversing that, which means that we need to weaken the dollar and give up world reserve currency and capital outflows into other regions. Can't tell you that part of the story, just telling you that we're going to keep the dollar strong and we're going to do this. So apparently this strategy is to bring back industry, which is a good thing. America needs to recognize where it is in the global power game of capital right now. And that brings back the jobs into America so it can focus on its own people. It can weaken the dollar. The proof of weapons network gets dismantled. People stop lending to the US government. They then lend and invest in their own infrastructure because their currencies are strengthening relative to the dollar. And they start spending that back into America. And then America has a trade surplus. Basically, he's fighting what he claims are called unfair duties imposed by, others on US goods. And so that is the narrative that's being shared. Trump, in effect, in executing this, as I said, has blown up the global trading system that has stood for basically more than 75 years of the proof of weapons network that was negotiated at Bretton Woods. Most people know it for the financial system. Bretton Woods also set up protecting all the borders, protecting all the ports, and dollar dominance by backing it by gold. They defaulted, as I said, in 71 with the Nixon shock. But by doing this, it is saying we are entering a new world order. But Americans are meant to believe that we're entering a new world order and we're still going to dominate the world as the global hegemon. One has to give. You either continue the system and end up in a civil war and communism and a surveillance state because of the wealth inequality through the structure of the dollar, or you reverse the system, you do a stablecoin standard, Bitcoin standard, you use tariffs and you shrink the economy and recognize that other powers are the powers, and you focus and double down on AI, and hopefully Americans follow the asset strippers that are essentially trying to get their last part of the dollar to buy Bitcoin, and everyone follows that, and we enter into capital outflows. Or you start with the first and then think you're going to thread the needle and reverse back to the debt-based Ponzi scheme. Whatever happens, you need to protect yourself. All roads lead to protecting yourself with Bitcoin. So the idea of this day, April the 2nd, is that there is a new 10% baseline tariff on all imports from every country, even those that impose lower rates upon the US. And so this is a new revenue stream. and this new revenue stream comes in. And if you want to avoid it, then you can take your factory, build it in America, and employ Americans. And then hopefully that creates wealth. And if it creates wealth, then the fact that your iPhone now costs $5,000 rather than $1,000 because it's made in America, hopefully there's enough wealth distribution because it brought back the jobs, and America can be insulated, and it increases the wealth while at the same time correcting the stock markets, correcting capital markets. Or it's a psyop because they're just going to reverse it and get the Fed to reverse it and try and just renegotiate in the short term, which I feel like that's what they're doing. Anyway, so the announcement said that they're going to charge half of what they are charging the US. So if Cambodia has 70%, then the reciprocal tariffs is going to be 35%. Firstly, where did that chart come from? Where did those numbers come from? Most people recognize that these were crazy numbers that didn't bear effect on reality. But anyway, those were the numbers that created the corrective event. The numbers were, try and figure out how those numbers came. But anyway, the numbers are there. And now everyone moves to a negotiation friendly. The market crashes. The Fed needs to decide what to do. All of the world needs to decide what to do. And the market is so uncertain, but we get the change. This is what Trump was here for, change. So, for example, European Union are going to be charged, they basically get 39% tariffs. China gets 54% tariffs. In general, from the research that I've done, and it's a complex calculation, but in general, US tariffs have always been lower than those of other countries, because they got the world reserve currency and they created the debt-based Ponzi scheme and they perpetuated dollars globally in order to be able to fund and create the proof of weapons network and create global terrorism in order to wipe out and kill 300 million people through wars, death, and destruction, because the mafia runs the CIA and the money is printed to extract wealth from the middle class, as I've always said. But according to the World Trade Organization, I tried to look up the real numbers. And the World Trade Organization says the average US tariff, and they said it's weighed for goods actually traded, is 2.2%. That's the average. In comparison with the EU, the average is 2.7%. And with China, apparently, is 3%. And in India, it's more like 12%. And so that's what the World Trade Organization says. You do the study if you're interested in that. But now this is levied upon 60 different countries as well. So 60 different countries are impacted. China got 54%, as I said. Cambodia got 49%. They're saying this is half, so they're saying that they charge 100%. Remember, if you've read Operation Gladio, that remember all of these drug trafficking organizations and the addiction of America, addiction on heroin, was created by the CIA. And they had to destroy these countries in order to get those routes and those drug trafficking routes to prop up the dollar. And they did it through the Vatican Bank. And the Vatican Bank was the money laundering organization. The CIA was Nazis, mafia, Italian mob, Jewish mob. Read the book, Operation Gladio. This is all fact. This is all true. And they created sex trafficking, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking, in order to create violence in the Middle East. Israel was created as a jurisdiction. Again, not talking about the people, not talking about the religion. I'm talking about the intelligence that created it. And then you co-opt these organizations that have resources. You plunder their resources through violence, through mob death and destruction. And then you create slave labor. That created the transatlantic slave trade across America and Europe and Britain. Then you put these people in ghettos. You get them addicted to drugs. And that is all imported through the CIA in order to, and then you create all of these wars. You get them to fight the wars. And then they come back with PTSD. You make them homeless. You get them addicted to drugs. That's how that's how this system, it's a mafia system. That's how it treats its own people, let alone all the people that it was, the 300 million people that died outside of the network, including its own people. Then you end up with these tariff wars, IMF, and all of the things I've covered on the proof of weapons network. That's why Cambodia has to charge at. And Trump says, oh, no, they treat us unfairly. Anyway, you do the math. Laos, who was part of that original operation, 48% tariffs. Vietnam, part of that drug trafficking operation that created the proof of weapons network through Operation Gladio, they now have to pay 46%. They got split into Operation Gladio, communism versus capitalism, split the country in two. 10 years Vietnamese War, wiped out $7 trillion from the average American and European to fight those wars, all for the profits of the military-industrial complex. Sri Lanka, they pay 44%. Thailand, 36%. All of these organizations were part of the Proof of Weapons Network. Taiwan, 32%. They were a US first island in order to create those semiconductor chips. But the narrative that you're fed in MAGA is that, no, they're treating us really badly. South Africa, 30%. I mean, the resources, 800 years of terrorism across Africa in order to exploit all of its resources and still exploiting them today, funding M23 in Congo, using the Rwandan government, backing it while you're pretending you're sanctioning it so that it can steal Congo's resources. Rwanda's the largest exporter of rare earth minerals to the Proof of Weapons Network, even though it doesn't have those rare earth minerals, all funded by creating all these militia groups, funded Western interests like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda. We've covered this many times. And then you use those in order to justify the war so that you can take those resources. And then South Africa, we're told, oh, they're so bad, all because they launched an ICC case against Netanyahu for plausible genocide, and he won, and it was actually convicted. India, again, 26%, a rising power by taking sanctions, using Russian gas and oil, and then exporting it to Europe by taking a clip there just to circumvent sanctions. As with all of these countries, the only reason they charge these tariffs is because the CIA that's importing all the drugs and getting Americans addicted to, all the drugs in America, they're using these different jurisdictions in order to get the resources from Afghanistan and China and the poppy seeds, refactor them through the Mexican drug cartels that are actually institutionally part of the CIA and the banksters that are laundering all of this money through. All part of it. We're led to believe that this is about coming after them, despite the fact that the government is only layer 3. Layer 1 is the central bank. Layer 2 is intelligence. Intelligence protect corporate interests for the mafia organization that props up the Proof of Weapons Network. And then the IMF is the economic hitmen that create all of this death and destruction and basically institutionalize and securitize the sex trade, the drug trafficking trade, the arms trade, and use sanctions as financial weapons of mass destruction and currency warfare through through plants like George Soros, who's the currency guy that uses hedge funds by borrowing at 0% from the central bank. Anyway, it's gaslighting when you know the truth. Follow the money. It's so much easier to understand the world. Then you don't get fooled. Narrative control. India, 26%. Japan, 24%. I mean, Japan. The Japanese central bank is an organization that lends out trillions because it was essentially co-opted by the Fed system, the ECB system, or later the ECB. And you get free money that causes inflation to the everyday Japanese people. So that funds can borrow money at 0% and then create that Japanese carry trade and basically create a financial weapon of mass destruction anytime you want to do whatever with the economy. European Union, which was always, as I said, about taking away sovereignty from the European countries, 20% tariffs. Philippines, which is a vassal state after all the crimes against humanity that the Americans did in Philippines and all of the raping and sex trafficking and everything that happened through these Proof of Weapons Network. Philippines, which now has a military base in order to get the military-industrial complex profits as it moves away from the Middle East into the Asia-Pacific region and the European region. They now have to pay 17%. And the reciprocal tariffs, of course, will not go to specific goods such as copper, pharmaceuticals, cars, semiconductor chips, lumber, gold, energy, basically certain minerals that are not available in the United States. Basically, according to the White House, they won't be charged. Why? Because they are all required by those that paid for the Trump administration campaign in the first place. That's what the technocrats need. They need the minerals for the batteries that are required for the Teslas so that the Teslas can provide the data for artificial intelligence that is needed because Elon Musk, on behalf of the globalists that has got capital invested in all regions, can just say MAGA, MAGA, make America great again, while it asset strips everyday Americans. Protect yourself. I hope I'm wrong. I don't think I'm wrong, but follow the money and it tells you the truth. Do not listen to what they say. These were implanted by the same CIA outfit. How do you think Elon got all the technology that the military-industrial complex created? And then the NSA is used in order to get that data back into intelligence. What deal do you think that was? Do you think he runs all these companies? Anyway. So now countries are then coming back and they're retaliating as we speak. Some will cave in and capitulate because they got no power. Almost others will say, no, we're going to hold strong. Some of them are going to get the Bank of England, like Carney, to run their country and use their power of the proof of weapons network to try and get some negotiation leverage so that Canada can be asset stripped under the guise of pretending to fight against MAGA or Trump. And so you got all those narratives going around and we're all meant to get behind them. But anyway, this week, almost $5 trillion was wiped off from the US stock market. Could be closer to $7 trillion by the time we're done on the Liberation Day announcement. So the rest of the world then says, we need to not have dependency upon the American economy. We need to hedge. What does that do? That's what creating the global world order is changing, shrinking America into a regional power and forming allegiances around BRICS, Middle East, and the other superpower surplus nations. So China, Japan, and South Korea, they announced that they're going to be agreeing in order to promote regional trade with each other. India comes out and then starts considering easing its trade and investment restrictions that were imposed between China. So BRICS align again, even though they share a border and they were enemies before. Now they start to say, right, let's get rid of all that. Let's do our trade together. Chinese electric vehicle giants like BYD, then it starts to saying that it's going to be considering investing $10 billion into creating a new factory and manufacturing plant for within India. The Canadian Prime Minister, now run by Mark Carney, who's campaigning to be he's the interim, and now he's campaigning the ex-Bank of England governor. He said that the era of close relations with the United States is over. Could be posturing, could be part of the proof of weapons network. You know, most of these leaders are just part of the same game as well, because capital has decided. Capital has decided where money's going, where the surpluses go. Trump is telling everyone that it will help lower taxes. So this is meant to be met with a tax reform and lower taxes for the everyday American to offset some of these effects. So we shall see if the strategy is that. He then comes out and says, well, this is just a tactic for you to negotiate. He said in one speech that, for example, if China wants to negotiate, he can give us TikTok. If he gives us TikToks, then we'll consider reducing tariffs on China, the largest economy in the world, the superpower. Just give me TikTok. And then we can control the narrative and we can put that into the NSA. and we can do our Israel first strategy, because remember, Israel, the leadership came out and said, we don't have a youth problem, we have a TikTok problem, because too many of them are finding out the truth of what I call the proof of weapons network. And one of those vital construct is the violence of, the weaponization of Holocaust and that narrative in order to create violence in the Middle East as well. Trump says that he hopes the Fed chair, Jerome Powell, is going to cut interest rates. So that battle between that strategic tension that I talk about, the Fed can blame Trump administration. The Trump administration can blame the Fed. You get carnage, you create that carnage. And that's the strategic tension that's needed in order to manufacture consent for this stablecoin standard. You can then say, well, the reality is we're in debt. We've got $9 trillion to refinance. We need to do that at a lower rate. Now we've got the 10-year treasury down. We can do that at a lower rate. That saves us trillions. And we can then thread the needle and rebalance the economy and go back into growth all of a sudden. And hopefully confidence doesn't go, even though the agendas that are asset stripping the economy are all invested in the hedge. So they're invested, they're going to be fine no matter what, which is why you need to look after yourself. So what is really happening here? I believe, again, following the money, this is a bit speculative, but I believe that he's doing what he's paid to do. So what do I always do? I don't believe politicians. I believe every politician, despite whether you think that they're, coming after the deep state or not. I believe to get into a position of power, you need money, then you're blackmailed, you're lobbied, and then if you get in a position of power and you don't do as you say, you're assassinated anyway. So nobody is above the system, no matter who you think. Could be 12D chess. I'll be the first to admit it if the 12D chess plays out in any way. But I don't think it is, from following the money and everything that I'm seeing. So what is he being paid to do? Well, what do central banks want right now? Well, gold price is going to all new all-time highs because they're buying gold. So central banks is hedging for a change in world order. The Fed, the SEC, BlackRock, they got all their bodies into Bitcoin. They did the operation Choke Point 2.0. They launched the Bitcoin ETF. They got all of the TradFi financial institutions into Bitcoin, and now they're handing out an item of deregulation so that they can all get the Bitcoin financial services. Elon, what is he doing? He's the technocrat. He's saying, I am right-wing now. I used to care about climate change. Now I care about right-wing things. I care about MAGA. But what is he doing? He's getting the AI, robotics, and the stablecoin system all set up and collaborated, saying, Trump, please go to Greenland and get me these rare earth minerals for batteries, and I will give the NSA and the Proof of Weapons Network all the data from the cars so that we can then create this stablecoin social credit score. So he's the number one backer. He's creating that region, the AI technocrat. Who is the second largest backer of the Trump campaign? It is the Mellon family. The Mellon family, they're globalists. So you've got Elon, a globalist, invested in all regions. You got the Mellon family. And by the way, they don't just fund campaigns for love of country. They fund campaigns to get returns. It's ROI. It's pragmatism. It's simple ROI. It's prostitution. I'll pay you this. You get me this. Elon, this is what you get. Mellon, what do you get? Well, the Mellon is plugged into the Proof of Weapons Network. They know that there's a recollaboration of the New World Order, and the New World Order says there's power in the Middle East, there's power in the BRICS bloc, Europe is being sacrificed for CBDC beta testing, and America's going to become an AI data center, and China's going to be competing in the AI race, building robotics as well. They're invested in it all. So global capital flows are saying we need blocks. What is block saying? It's saying, please move all of the money, the military money, away from the Middle East, over to Europe and over to Asia Pacific. So the military industrial complex can get its next bit of attention. Please also create a stable BRICS and a stable Middle East so that we can invest into those regions with any capital outflows. So the Mellon family is saying, shrink America into regional power, support blocks, and Trump, you can benefit from the Bitcoin strategy, the stablecoin strategy, and you can have strategic investments in all these regions, and you get to thread the needle and see what you can do. But whichever way it goes will be okay. So even if Trump knows it or not, that's his boss. Who was the third largest of capital? The Adelson family. The Adelson family are the Zionist part of the faction, the Israel first part of the faction, making sure that Trump is doing what AIPAC says, making sure that all of the AIPAC and different factions have the Israel first strategy within Senate and Congress. And they have a different plan. Their plan is that they know that the GCC is the power in the region, the Gulf Cooperation countries, you know, the Saudis, the Emiratis, they have too much power. They're looking to normalize with Iran before October the 7th. So that is a faction of disruption. We need America to go into war. Now, they want to do that because if they can get American boots on the ground in the Middle East, then they know that they can do a psyop like they did before in the 67 war, USS Liberty, or like they did with 9/11, where you radicalize Americans to fight Iraq and Iran, basically funding both sides of that for the profits of the military industrial complex and clean break memo and everything that came. So the Adelson is saying, allow us to do whatever we want in the Middle East, and give us as much power as you can, strategically escalate, because we know we've got to negotiate with the real powers, which is the GCC. And although there are some factions of radicalized Masonic Zionism, you can have that, but capital says it's more profitable now. We don't need the Israel strategy of creating all that war in the Middle East. Now there is so much capital, let's stabilize the region. There's more profits in that, which is why if you look at the military contracts, they're exiting the Middle East, they're moving to cybersecurity and AI, and they're going to Europe and Asia Pacific. So that's where you get the strategic tension. I'll cover more about that, how that's happening in the geopolitical section. So the three strategies, the three backers, the three people that said, here's hundreds, millions, you need to deliver that for me. What is Trump's job? Trump is to do that. And that's everything that he's doing. He's creating the technocracy. He's carving up the dollar for the stable coins. He's creating the AI ecosystem. He's shrinking America into a regional power, which is the Mellon family. And he is doing strategic escalations in the Middle East via Israel proxy in order to strengthen their negotiation power. Now, he's not putting boots on the ground because he may know that Israel can use that as a psyop to actually get in a war in the East, which would be the fall of America, because Iran has agreements with China and Russia and the BRICS layer. And that is just World War III, economic destruction for everybody. Nobody profits from that. And it becomes pragmatic. So Zionism is no longer useful in that map of the world. And so they're trying to hold on to that narrative. And Trump has to deliver that. So he's strategically allowing them to do what they want, knowing that the GCC has the power, is my belief. That's what capital says. Now, even whether Trump's doing that or not, money can be used in order to say, do this. That is your job. Now, your job, Trump, is to get a narrative to make that acceptable to Americans. And your job, Europe, is to just do it and see what you can get away with, because we don't have sovereign states in Europe anymore. So the European banks are now calling the Fed in this crisis since tariffs and trying to get Citibank bailed out. Citibank, a shareholder in the Federal Reserve, because they're now forcing the Europe is now speaking with the Fed saying reduce rates. It worked. They don't have enough dollars. By being too big to fail, they can force the Fed's hand because they're optimizing for their shareholders, the banks, not American people. Now, in his speech, he tells you that he's doing this dual mandate to maximize price stability and employment. Anyway, The banks and the European banks, they want the rates to be cut. They want easing. They want to print more. They want to get as much money and give it to the military industrial complex. Switzerland is, they're currently they're in trouble. They've got a negative two-year yield as a result of this. That will drive Switzerland into recession. That's the home of the Bank for International Settlements. So global capital uses its influence to change Fed policy. BlackRock, what are they doing? They're negotiating all of the ports. What was Bretton Woods? Bretton Woods was America controlling the ports. BlackRock is saying, we'll buy all these ports. America, or Trump, is saying, we need this for the national security of America. No, you need that to give the profits to BlackRock. Those ports pay billions of dollars in fees. Tariffs, 10% tariffs. Who benefits from that? The ports that support what BlackRock want. So now you're getting all of these strategic negotiations where regional power means control of ports. BlackRock profits from that. BlackRock is global capital. So it is being done. Now, what's happening with the port in Panama? The narrative is fed to America. We need it for national security. The CIA benefits. You get to use it in order to control certain policy. China gets upset. China said, well, we invested in the Belt and Road Initiative. We were supporting Panama. We were allowing them to have the profits because we want them to buy our product. We want them to buy our cheap cars. And they were getting electric vehicles all across Panama. Now BlackRock says, no, we can't do that. We get the contracts over to Elon. Panama, you need expensive ones from Elon. So China then blocks the deal that is being done negotiating all these ports with BlackRock. And how does it do it? Because it's got investors from Hong Kong and says, the Hong Kong owner, you're no longer allowed to sign off on this deal. So it is safeguarding public interest. What is this? This is an exact example of the difference between the China and America model. China's reinvesting in its people and reinvesting in countries to get them to buy products. The proof of weapons network, the dollar-euro system, and the petrodollar system is propping up assets through violence in the Middle East, sacrificing Europeans in order to get regime change, war, death, destruction, and prop up the dollar to get to asset strip Europeans and Americans over to those contractors, which the CIA and the Fed are working for, essentially, the corporate interests. They're all shareholders in each other. And China says, no, you can't do that. BlackRock says, you can do that. We're going to take over the land and the port and the profits from tariffs. And we're asset stripping everyday Americans. They get some more inflation when the Fed gets to pivot the strategy, but at least they get to think that they're winning. I'm sorry they lied to you. When you follow the money, this is the story that is told. If they do different and money tells me otherwise, I'll adjust and I'll say that was absolutely ethical. They're going to shrink the economy. They're going to tackle this, but it's systemic, which is why the proof of weapons network can never strategically retreat. You will always be disappointed unless you have a Bitcoin strategy. And that's when you start to understand whether the country's doing it. So do you get the Bitcoin? We covered that in the Bitcoin section. If you get the Bitcoin, you know that they're trying to do something. Do you get the yield on the stable coins? If you do, you know they're trying to do something. If they don't do that, then you know it's all about asset stripping, knowing that the dollar's going through a strategic retreat. So 26 different ports in 26 different countries are all being negotiated between BlackRock and China right now. JD Vance comes along and says, I'm going to go visit Greenland. Who's he visiting Greenland for? For Elon Musk. That's the resources, the rare earths, the batteries that are needed in order to sell more cars. If you can then sell them into Panama and all the other regions around the strategic power. But what narrative do you get? We need them for national security. So he goes and visits Greenland over the last 2 weeks in the name of national security. And if you believe that, I've got an oil field to sell you as well, because there are vast resources that those that paid for the Trump administration want to exploit. So all they got to do is put the narrative while they asset strip and benefit from it as well. So Denmark, who actually is the colonialist that took control of Greenland, they publicly condemn it. And what do? They spend more on the military-industrial complex. So it's just a way of negotiating contracts with those euros to prop up the euro dollar, which means if they are going to rebuild their manufacturing base, then that means you need to weaken the dollar. Weakening the dollar means you can't prop up the petrodollar. Does any of it make sense? Well, apparently they've got a plan. I mean, if you can see it, you can see it. Damn complicated. And so Carney's coming along and saying that he's taking Trump's annexation. Seriously, Canadians, strategic tension. You need to believe that we're going to be forced to become the 51st of the United States. The CIA is what lets all that fentanyl through, but we need to blame it on Canada. So then we can spend more money and we get more wealth confiscation in the proof of weapons network, and they start playing their theatrics, just like Zelensky's paying his theatrics. So what do we get at the end of this? Well, today, right up until Bitcoin Hard Talk, the Fed came out and Jerome Powell, the reasonable guy, the GOAT, the head, says, I'm the reasonable balance against Trumpal craziness. I won't talk about it. Strategic tension again, the reasonable versus the crazy. And so Jerome Powell came out and said the narrative that he wants to push, which is, it's not working, Trump. We're expecting higher inflation. While Trump is saying, no, we're expecting deflation. We're going to get prices down. So then you get that strategic tension so that Jerome Powell can blame Trump. Trump can blame Jerome Powell. Jerome Powell is saying expect higher inflation and lower growth, stagflation. That's what the head of the Federal Reserve is. He said, I'm not retiring. I'm living out my final 1 year. You don't control me. We're layer 1, you're layer 3. So all of the language in the speech today, anyway, it was focused on inflation, implying what does inflation mean? Implying that if inflation is not under control, then I don't need to cut rates. Now you can create the strategic argument between the Federal Reserve and the Trump administration. So this is pushing that strategic tension that I always talk about. And that's the way you need to do it in order to be able to blame each other. But what is really happening? Well, global capital is saying that you need to be a regional power, which means you need to shrink the economy. That's what global capital is saying. So Fed talks about, well, you know, how do we do this? Well, he's saying there is a changing immigration policy that creates strategic tension between everybody. There is, between the left and the right. You change fiscal policy all at the same time, massive changes. You create trade policy, massive, massive changes with October the 2nd. And you change regulatory policy all at the same time. What is the end result? Everything that Adelson wanted, that the Mellon family wanted, and that Elon Musk wanted, which is what they paid for. So what happens next? Well, we need to then decide, what is the Fed going to do? What are the 10-year Treasury? 10 years have gone down, the yield's gone down. That means that it worked in order to restructure the debt and get it cheaper. But at what cost? We will find out. Can they recover the economy? Can they thread the needle? Was that the plan in the first place? Well, the Fed says we're not meeting FOMC, the bunch of banksters that get together every quarter. They're meeting on May the 7th. So then we find out, are they going to cut rates? Are they going to leave hold? Everybody's saying, what is going to happen with markets? And more uncertainty, more uncertainty. More uncertainty means capital outflow, which shrinks the economy, which is what the global world order wanted in the first place. The US cannot be profitable and the world reserve currency at the same time. Remember the walls of money. In a debt-based Ponzi scheme, you have to choose between if you want the world reserve currency then you have to have persistent trade and fiscal deficits. If you want to push for free trade and fiscal surpluses, then you have to shrink the money supply, and with it, the economy, which is a depression because you're paying down the debt, essentially. That's the fundamental flaw of the Fed's debt-based Ponzi scheme. You can't have both. But Trump's saying we're delivering you both. So maybe they all know something that the economics doesn't know about, and maybe they've got $65,000 D chess. The UK learned this the hard way. By the way, nothing is new. This is what the Bank of England did to England, and this is what drove us into World War I. But you don't need World War Is in modern day warfare because it's more profitable to avoid World War III, which was the old plan. And instead, you block the regions up into blocks. So you just need to protect yourself. Don't rely on the politicians. If the politicians under-promise and over-deliver, great. I'll be the first to admit it, saying, wow, he really was looking out for those middle class. But if not, protect yourself, rely upon yourself. That's what Bitcoin was created for. Trustlessness, no leader, no holy messiah that's going to come back. Just simple maths and code that is now too big with proof of work, that can fight back against the global financiers that are now arranging the global economy and giving people their bit of Bitcoin. Trump is the messenger in order to shrink America to regional power, is what I think is going on, and dress it up as make America great again. So that is what I think we are seeing right now. I know it is incredibly complicated, but the TLDR is I follow the money. Trump is doing what he is paid to do. And I think everything that he is saying to you will turn out to not deliver you the result that you originally asked for. And the only way to make it is to do what he is doing, asset strip the dollar, end up with Bitcoin, and follow exactly what he's doing with his money, which is betting against the dollar and betting for Bitcoin, even though that is not what's being said. So I hope you enjoyed that. That's going to do it for Bitcoin Hard Talk episode 76, part 2. This week in macro, we've done this week in Bitcoin, this week in macro, and we're going to now move over to part 3. Part 3 is where we're going to do this week in geopolitics, tie it all together with everything that's actually happening on the war zones right now. And then I'll look at whether my theories about what is actually going to happen by following the money is playing out on the war zones of the proof of weapons network right now. So let me grab some water. While I do that, please do share, please do like, please do retweet, please do subscribe to my channel. Please do sign up for the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. Go over to simondixon.com, get a free digital copy of my book. Get all of the video series back up. Go to Telegram group. All the links are on my thing. Go do some of that. I'm just going to grab some water, and then we're going to go into part 3 this week in geopolitics. Okay, welcome to part 3 of Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 76. Now we're going to be doing this week in geopolitics. In part 1, we discussed this week in Bitcoin and the Stablecoin Standard that you need to watch out for, and bit bonds and strategies for yourself, companies, and countries to prepare for a world of Bitcoin, AI, and CBDCs. In part 2, we went through the infamous Trump tariffs and what Liberation Day on 2nd of October means. Followed the money to try and figure out what comes next. That was covered in this week in macro. Now we go to this week in geopolitics, where we fund the symptom of the proof of weapons network, which is death and destruction to prop up a debt-based dollar scheme, called the dollar, and all of the subnodes and shitcoins like the euro and the pound that are part of the network as well. Right. What I want to do is now, finally, after 16 months of study, I put together some people that I follow on X that are involved, that are money people that think similar to me, and understand what happens in the geopolitical side. They're not indoctrinated through the European and America media to give us our narrative of thinking we're exporting democracy. These are people that have family members blown up by the proof of weapons network, that understand the game, understand the psyops, and understand what's happening. One of the accounts I follow on Twitter, a guy called Evan, I borrowed some of his work and combined it with mine as well. But what I want to do right now is, if you've watched any of my previous episodes, you know that I explained how the proof of weapons network works. Terrorism is a strategic political term to create strategic tensions through operations like Operation Gladio, that is designed for the terrorist network, which is the real terrorist, the mob at the CIA, the mafia at the CIA, that money launders through banks using money printing to wipe out the middle class. And they get that money through having their sex trafficking, their human trafficking, their weapons trafficking, and drug trafficking operations, which is what all this global network that we're allegedly tariffing are doing. And it is state-sponsored terrorism. They use psyops by buying the media through Operation Mockingbird in order to make you feel psychologically tension with each other so that they can justify war and they can create war as they choose. All of these ops were documented in previous operations through Operation Gladio, and I know that they still happen today, even though they'll say that was a thing of the past. Of course, we only did that in the past. Right, so based upon that understanding, what happened on October the 7th? I now think we have everything that we need to understand it. I believe that the strategic tension in the Middle East that created $7.5 trillion of profit when the UK created Israel in the first place, and all the false flag operations that led to it, that then America started using it for its US foreign policy. It was $7.5 trillion of profit for the military-industrial complex based upon the strategic tension between Israel and Iran. You know, Iran was asset stripped by British Petroleum when we installed our puppet government. They tried to nationalize their oil. That then led to a CIA coup where we replaced democracy with dictatorship and the Shah. And then there was a revolution. And if you look at the war between Iran and Iraq, that was Saddam Hussein. America, the CIA, and the Fed funded Saddam Hussein, and they also did the Contra affair, which was the controversial drug trafficking operation the CIA set up through the poppy seeds in Afghanistan, where they did a drug for weapons sale, where they gave Iran weapons after the Iranian Revolution. That then, when they had those weapons, they were able to profit from both sides of the war, and they had Israel to create the strategic attention that they needed for the fake war on terror 2.0, which was kicked off through false flags like 9/11, when they turned on Saddam Hussein after stealing all the gold of Iraq. That whole affair was strategic tension that led to $7.5 trillion wiped out of middle-class Europeans and Americans and over to the profits of the proof of weapons network. That still exists today. And that model made a lot of money. But there was one thing: the GCC, the Gulf Corporations, the Emiratis, the Qataris, the Saudis, and various other regions, they built up massive economic power by cooperating with America, and cooperating with Europe, and cooperating with China, and they cooperated with America to create the petrodollar. That then enabled them to build economic power. With that economic power, they're now able to fight back against their colonizers. And so if you look at UAE, it was originally colonized by Portugal, then Britain. And so they created a two-tier system where essentially they said, we'll have rules for native Muslims and rules for tourists. And we'll allow them to have their prostitution and various other things. We'll allow them to have Russian immigrants that by night are prostitutes. They then take that money to buy goods in UAE, and then they buy them from UAE and then take them back to Russia and sell them in the shop for the rest of the week. That created a lot of profit. And then because there's prostitution there, it attracts Western that want to come there. And then they create different rules where alcohol is allowed here, but not allowed, for these people here. And based upon that, they have to use the game that they're faced with to build against their colonizers. This was, I got this model from Middle Nation is a channel I follow that really breaks down many of these things. Amazing content. And then they were able to use that in order to basically become a regional economic power. And economic regional power allows you to fight back against the proof of weapons network. So then you have this crazy games that we have right now, where the Western funded these groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and then other powers can now play the same game where they can rent them out and they can create strategic tension in order to create carnage in a region in order to get back power. And once you understand how the whole thing works, it's absolutely immoral. It's absolutely disgusting, but it is using the same weapons that were created by the proof of weapons network against the proof of weapons network to build economic power. And this is why you have things like October the 7th being allowed to happen. This is why there was a Hannibal directive on October the 7th admitted by the Israeli head of war that they killed their own people and blamed it on, Hamas. These are declassified. This is why the media funded by USAID managed to engage in BBC propaganda, atrocity propaganda, get Biden to say there were 40 beheaded babies, and watch the documentary Atrocity Propaganda, where none of the things that they said happened actually happened. There was a lot of violence, no doubt about it, but they're insurgents. And now it's come out, clearly what we knew all along, that Netanyahu was allowing bags of cash to get to Hamas via Qatar in order to fight against the US puppet government, Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and create a group that he knew he was paying in order to bring the people that were in economic destruction, compromise some of the leadership, and create an event like October the 7th that was then strategically used in order to determine what the future of the region is. Why does Qatar and various other regions allow that to happen? Because they have a different vision. They want a stable Middle East. Israel is a tool of US foreign policy, which is destabilized. But now the capital is such that model is no longer useful. And so we were going to go through two models. It was either World War III, which is Israel destabilizing and getting America to go to war with Iran based upon the narrative of Iran's going to fire nukes at Israel and kill the Jews, and then creating a group like Hamas so that you can say it's the Muslims trying to kill the Jews, and all the narratives that happen through atrocity propaganda. Many people believe in it because they're radicalized by this narrative. It's a psychological operation to create strategic tension so that you can have people willing to fight and do a genocide and justify it in the name of religion. These are the operations, like Operation Gladio revealed. If you don't believe it, the USAID funds it and radicalizes people into thinking something else is going on, and they get all the profits. But they wanted to create a scenario where one model or another was going to happen. And that is where we are today. So this was a straight move, as I see it, in order to finalize the new world order that is happening right now. It was also tied into the CIA US aggression against Russia in order to create strategic tension so that you could wipe out Europe, blow up Nord Stream pipeline, and get rid of the manufacturing base in Germany, get it addicted to expensive gas from America, and create the $1 billion of euros that Euro needs so that the military industrial complex can take all that money by taking at the expense of Europeans all of that money into military contracts. That's what Ukraine was. America got the rare earth minerals, BlackRock got the land. Then we get to negotiate all the ports and the strategic routes, and based upon the outcome of these wars, the port routes will be negotiated, the semiconductor routes will be negotiated, the natural gas routes will be negotiated, the oil routes will be negotiated, and you have time, and the military industrial complex gets to profit it to determine who has the most power, which will then shape the new world order. So let me break it down. Iran and Israel has strategic tension. America funds both sides of that in order to do the bidding of escalation through, and then right now we enter into that is changing. So what do you need to do to change that? You escalate to de-escalate. So then you have, like an Operation Gladio, massive chaos in order to determine where it's going. And you have to follow the money in order to figure out where it will go. My assessment of the current situation is that they wanted under Biden to get America into war with Iran so that Israel could push forward the old model and become the sole nuclear power in the region. The problem is that it didn't work, because they said that they would meet their strategic goals and they had a set time frame to return the hostages, eliminate Hamas, and ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. It wasn't about eliminating Hamas. They created the human shield narrative. Their goal was to get rid of the Palestinians. If they could achieve it, then they got the land, they got the world order, they got to be the regional power in the Middle East, and America would continue backing it. But they had, from October the 7th until the 20th of January 2025, where the new administration comes in, and whoever had won between Iran-backed or US-backed, whoever won that would end up determining the normalization and everything that would happen next. And Israel lost. And so what did Trump do? Trump gave carte blanche, said, I'm the man of peace, gave ceasefire. Ceasefire then led to Israel doing whatever they want, continuing to kill, rape, massacre, hold off, make sure the hostages don't return, block the water, do genocide, weaponize starvation, everything they did, cut off all the tents, and then use that in order to get back into it. And then Trump created a narrative to the American people that this is because the hostages were treated so badly. Then Israel gets to do whatever it wants. America backs it, which is what it is doing right now, because it knows that Israel has lost. Global capital has said there will be peace in the Middle East. That is where I think it is. Now, where do we know that this happened? Well, because Netanyahu could not make it happen, there was a regime change within Iran already. Remember when the helicopter with Raisi, the prime minister, went down? And we got the Grand Khamenei. He's getting older right now. I believe that there is negotiations and pragmatism and profits and incentives that are now all in line, that there will be normalization across the region because the GCC has the economic power and Netanyahu couldn't deliver the vision that it was meant to be. So, because Palestinians refused to be ethnically cleansed, because Egypt wouldn't let them pass the border, because the GCC put together a $53 billion plan, because they had economic strength and their economic strength grew while America's economic strength was weakening, while Israel's economic strength was weakening, while Europeans' economic strength was weakening, we had a change in this power, in this dynamic to the New World Order, which I think is happening today. Israel has lost economic power. I believe, now Iran did lose economic power as well, but I believe that's why they capitulated and they negotiated with the GCC, with US, that US would be retreating, that the GCC would be taking over the region. And basically, it's all theater from here. Now, take off my financial hat and put on my humanitarian hat. It's the worst human crisis that I have ever had to witness. But you know what? It's been happening all along. This is just the first time we've had to watch it on video. This was the proof of weapons network all along. It's been happening across African regions. It's been happening across the Middle East. It's been happening to Americans' own people internally, Europeans' own people. It is a mafia group that is weaponizing and using this system and indoctrinating people into thinking that they are ethically superior and weaponizing religions all along. Okay. So what is happening right now? So let's have a look at what's happened over the last couple of weeks. So the Houthis attacked some of the planes that were flying into Israel. And that led to America getting more people across. Israel ships are still not getting across the Red Sea. That is weakening the Israeli economy. That is causing carnage. And that is a strategic blockade. So the US then sent another aircraft carrier to Yemen to carry out even more airstrikes. Trump said, we're going to get you. We're winning. We're going to wipe you out. Remember, though, that America's been doing that via proxy through Saudi Arabia for over a decade. The Houthis have created, Ansar Allah is actually his real name. America gave it the name Houthis. I only say that so you know who I'm talking about. They have proven, even China came out and said, I know you think these people look crazy. They're actually the 10th most powerful army in the world with the capacity that they have. You can only defeat them with a ground invasion. America knows that. So America is strong arming and trying to get them out with airstrikes. This is because this is just strategic negotiation to give Israel more power to negotiate with the GCC. We've had hundreds of US airstrikes on Yemen, many civilians. They failed to open up the Red Sea for Israel. Israel cannot get their goods through. It's economically destroying them. This is all for Israel. America's paying the bill. These are damn expensive. These cost a lot of money. And Americans footing the bill, as we said. This is just giving Israel their strategic negotiation power. And so that's why everything's looking up like it's escalating the narrative with Iran. Everyone's saying America's going to go to war with Iran. America's going to go to war with Iran. It is all about escalation to de-escalate because of the economic power has changed because Israel lost. So what's Israel doing? Because it's got carte blanche, it is a desperate sailor. Netanyahu's trying to negotiate his exit, and regime change is most likely to happen to one of normalization and removal of the strategic tension between Iran and Israel. The operation is over. The GCC gets to be in power. America gets to retreat, which means that global capital has said it is more profitable to take weapons out of the Middle East and instead allow for normalization. And that is what Trump is delivering. So what is Israel doing into this? Well, it killed 106 Palestinians today. There is no ceasefire. It is including the bombing of a school today where 30 children were killed, including 100 wounded. This is just today, let alone the last 2 weeks. Today, the US carried out 36 airstrikes in Yemen in support of Israel's strategic negotiation. Israel bombed Damascus in Syria. This is where there was the implant of ISIS and Al-Qaeda as the new leadership of Syria. Now there's going to be some kind of, regime change that I believe since the regime change happened in Iran, Iran allowed the Houthis leader to be targeted. They allowed the Hamas leaders to be taken out. They allowed the Hezbollah leaders to be taken out. They allowed this to happen because the negotiations that happen when those regime changes happen, because Netanyahu failed the vision. And now we're getting more and more of those, normalization with the axis. That's part of the plan. Israel warplanes launched 2 missiles at a residential building in southern Lebanon. America's installed its puppet government in America. But is it going to be strategically retreated? Are they going to allow sovereignty? These are what I believe is actually happening. So I think the GCC gets to say who's in charge. Today, we had the killing of a senior Hamas official alongside their daughter and their son as well. This was basically indiscriminate bombing is still happening in Gaza, just indiscriminately. We don't even pretend that they're just the human shield narrative anymore. They're just letting them destroy the whole place. This is because it's going to be rebuilt. Israel's got an ongoing military operation in the West Bank. Settlers are still expanding. They're trying to get as much land as possible. This is all about strategic, brutal, disgusting crimes against humanity, genocidal, ethnic cleansing attempts in order to just get strategic ceasefire, because now Trump has essentially basically started to recognize the human catastrophe. So before he was covering up for Netanyahu, now Trump is recognizing the first words we get that there is a brutal admission of this. Now remember, Israel is US foreign policy. This is a US genocide by layer 1 and layer 2, with layer 3 creating the narrative to dress it up as MAGA so that you can say we're fighting the terrorists. That's how it works, peeps. Once you know, you know. Anyway, the way that I interpret this, based upon my new understanding of follow the money, I believe, I'm not sure when it will happen, but I believe that there is going to be a deal, a negotiation, and there is going to be peace in the Middle East once and for all. Israel could not complete the genocide on time, and therefore Netanyahu needs to be regime changed. He needs to plan his exit. Netanyahu lost. And so what did we get this week? We saw Netanyahu visit the president of Hungary. Hungary then says, we're exiting EU. They're pushing a certain narrative that's very in line with pro-Israeli narrative right now. This may signal that this is the exit for the Netanyahu. This could be the strategic exit. It could be the regime change that we see in Israel. To me, maybe this means that it's happening. It's getting closer. But this is the proof of weapons that has already basically done the maths and recognized that the new model of profit is peace in the Middle East, hand the war machine over to Europe, extract value from the Europeans, and create uncertainty, fear, uncertainty, and doubt in the Asia-Pacific region. Go China, 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 protect Taiwan, 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 put more money in Japan, more money in Philippines, more money in Taiwan, which is why we're getting those tariff wars. And whether Trump knows that he's doing it or not, allow them to strategically align, and then we can put more money into those regions and the profit moves over to there. And we need a new narrative, which is escalating. That's where the real profits are right now, because of the new world order that we are experiencing. I believe that because we've hit peak centralization through the proof of weapons network, these are all the strategic calculated moves by controlling capital and the military industrial complex using its money printing of the Fed and intelligence operation to basically justify these endless budgets that basically manufacture all of these chessboards. And that is what we are seeing right now. Sometimes the operations go right, some of them go wrong. But the beauty of this whole situation, and I'm not talking about the people, I'm not talking about the religion, but the construct of Israel and its strategy of is basically over. It was never targeting Hamas. That's what people need to understand. It was always trying to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians and erase Gaza. It didn't do that. It was a campaign of ethnic cleansing designed to redraw the map in the Middle East and basically create the pure Jewish state, weaponize the Jewish people, get them to join the IDF, and commit to the greater Israel project. This war was strategic. And so now we have to ask, who was actually involved in it? Well, why was it just released what we knew all along, that Netanyahu was funding Hamas? That comes out strategically right now because this is the regime change. Netanyahu had a deadline to achieve what he had to achieve. And this is why he essentially ordered 1.1 million Gazans to evacuate within 24 hours when he started the campaign. This is why he created the human shield narrative. This is why he made up the 40 beheaded babies. This is why he did Hannibal Directive to create atrocity propaganda to kill his own people, so that then he could say those people that were killed, they were the ones that were mass sexual violence. This is what the Proof of Weapons Network does. This is why he rejected ceasefire. He made it strategic to let some hostages out at the right time. This is why he imposed a starvation campaign. This is why he did an illegal blockade. This is why it was a sprint to do it as fast as possible and manufacture consent. And this is why us on X Spaces, us debating, was infiltrated so that they could then install their own people, as they do through colored revolutions, and say, right, we're going to burn American flags and say anybody that is supporting anti-genocide is a lefty radical person. And therefore we can call them terrorism. And we can remove the First Amendment in America. And we can arrest people for doing peaceful protests. And we can change laws and say you can't be anti-Semitic, but you can be anti-American. So now we can use a Patriot Act style change so that we can beta test what Europeans are doing in their country within America. We can remove the First Amendment, see if they stand it. They can cheer it on saying, but Trump said so. This is MAGA. We're winning. We're winning. We're winning. While you're losing your First Amendment. And don't think that that's not going to be weaponized against you, as it was when they needed to manufacture consent for you to get killed by killing people in Iraq, and doing it where Julian Assange got arrested in order to reveal it through WikiLeaks, and Bitcoin fought back and funded it. And who took down the blockade? Bank of America, Visa, the stablecoin issuers, the global institutions that are paid for the Trump administration through Elon Musk, through the Mellon family, and through Adelston. And Trump is getting that message for you. This was to displace the population. Trump even tried to get it done. He said, we're going to take over America. And MAGA said, do we want to take over Gaza? He tested that narrative. Some were cheering it along. Others said, hell no, we don't go to war with Iran. And so therefore they couldn't use that strategy. It is we the people that have the power. This is what people need to understand. But you have to stand up against the psyop. You have to follow the money and recognize what's happening. You can't worship the idols. You need to press back against it. They are beta testing us. And we need to say, no, it won't happen. We will resist with Bitcoin. We won't allow that to happen. We will protest. We won't say we will IDIT worship Elon. We won't say we will IDIT worship Trump. MAGA means standing against Trump, standing against the CIA and the military industrial complex, using your power to not allow the beta test to succeed. That is why there will be a solution in the Middle East and there will be peace, because we, the people, resisted. We said, no, this is a genocide. It is not ISIS. There were not 40 beheaded babies. That was atrocity propaganda. You did make that up. We don't see it anymore. That is the reason why we are where we are right now, because we, the people, resisted. And that is what everyone's meant to be doing. It's not saying my Holy Spirit is going to bring back the Messiah and Trump is needed to do that. And therefore we need to forget about the 10 commandments and we need to worship Israel instead. And we need to then justify the unjustifiable and say genocide's allowed to happen. And we become useful idiots for the profits of the military industrial complex to prop up the Proof of Weapons Network that is asset stripping the system away from you. And you are manufacturing consent. Wake up, people. This is what we are meant to be doing. This is what patriotism is. This is what serving humanity is, fighting oppression and recognizing that the Proof of Weapons Network was manufactured in order to work against us. And Satoshi gave us a gift. Satoshi gave us proof of work. Satoshi gave us the ability to own our money. Satoshi gave us the ability to opt out of the Proof of Weapons Network. and send that money where we want it to go without the financial blockade of Bank of America, of Visa, with the ability to have peer-to-peer media systems so we can expose the proof of weapons network and the deep state like Julian Assange did, and we can fund them, and we can have real media. This is the real Constitution. This is the real Magna Carta. This is programmatic money that allows us to fight back against it. This is what Bitcoin is. This allows us to increase our wealth if we change our time preference and we can have a longer time frame. This is a gift, and they want you to give it to BlackRock. They want you to give it to the Proof of Weapons Network. They couldn't beat us, so they had to join us. That was their strategy. This is how we resist. We boycott. We program with our, they want to program our money. We program our money to benefit us. We take our money where they can't change it. We take it where we control our wallets, not them control our wallets. We control and decide where we're going to spend our money, not them decide where they're going to spend our money. We don't get debt slavery. We get rewarded for savings. We get to beat the Federal Reserve System. That is why Satoshi created it. I know because I was there. Not when it got created. I was there very shortly after. And I saw the people that were coding, and I saw what was on the Times newspaper when Bitcoin was created, and the Times newspaper said banks on the brink of financial disaster, with a picture of Israel invading Gaza to do their mow the law operation and create crimes against humanity for the profits of the military industrial complex, for the profits of the debt-based enslavement that the Proof of Weapons Network created. Remember those mow the lawn operations? They all happened before October the 7th. Netanyahu was paying for Hamas to be there. This was a strategy. This was a 70-year strategy of mowing the lawn and slowly getting rid of the people and propagandizing and radicalizing people in order to rewrite history and make us gaslight us and make us think that what we know to be true is not true. This is PSYOPs. This is what Operation Gladio is. This is what Operation Mockingbird is. This is why the Vatican Bank was a money laundering operation for the mafia, for the mob. This is what it is. Expose this damn system, because now we can fight back against it. This was created in the post-Bretton Woods New World Order. This started with the Bank of England. This continued with the Federal Reserve. Half the people working in these institutions don't know who their boss is. They work for a mafia. It is segregated, so you don't even know what's happening. Because the region before October the 7th was unifying. And the worst thing you could do in the Proof of Weapons Network is allow for peace. What was happening prior to October the 7th? The US influence in the region was getting smaller and smaller. It was fracturing. Why? Because they used the weapon against them. The Middle East was decolonizing and becoming economic powerhouses. Yes, they were working with the corruption. I choose to believe they had to, because you get eliminated, and look what happened to everybody that fought against it. You become Syria, you become Iraq, you become Lebanon. You need economic power. This is what we need to do with Bitcoin. We need to become economic powerhouses so that we get to decide, so that we get to fight against this. That's why October the 7th happened. That's why we were given those videos. That's why we needed to see the genocide. That's why those children died. That's why the IDF soldiers were radicalized and now they are committing sexual violence. Every accusation was a confession. They starved for us. They did that for us, to use our freedom of speech, to use our money to actually fight back against this. What else are we on earth to do? Because if you ignore it, you are complicit. And what do you get for being complicit? They're wiping you out anyway. They are lying to you. They are gaslighting you. They are assassinating your leaders. They are blackmailing you. They are exporting drugs. They are doing human trafficking. They are literally creating some sexual violence against our children. This is what the network was created for. Are we going to allow this to happen when they gave us Bitcoin? They gave us decentralization. We need decentralized AI. We need decentralized social media. We need decentralized money. We got it. We got this. We fight back with our money. We play them at their own game. You can do it peacefully if we choose, because that's the tool that was given to us. And you want to sit back and say, sorry, I've got too much debt. I'm going to ignore what happened. What is being beta tested in Palestine is coming to your stable coin. It is coming to your central bank digital currency. It is the same artificial intelligence that Peter Thiel from Palantir is building based upon the proof of network weapons network. And your pension is investing in the same product that will be used against you, that will take away your constitution, that will take away your Magna Carta. It was all a lie. They've been lying for us all along. They rewrote our history. And now we get to write our history. What are we going to do? Gaza was on the edge of collapse before October the 7th because Israel, the government, made it that way. From 2019 to 2023, the Arab world was reconciling because they were becoming economic powers. The UAE and Iran, they actually mandated, they actually put their ties together, long-term enemies. Operation Gladio, divide and conquer, strategic tension for the profits of the military-industrial complex. Saudi Arabia and Iran normalized via China. China put together a plan. Enemies in the region, strategic tension. They were normalizing. China had a peace plan. Say what you want about China. I don't want to live there. I don't want to live under that. I've been there. But they had a peace plan to fight back against that. The Qataris, they resolved their 2017 Gulf rift. The industry was getting more and more power. Syria started to actually be a part of the GCC. Qasem Soleimani was killing ISIS, and Trump took him out. Trump handed over Jerusalem to Israel. Trump did the Abraham Accords and sidestepped this negotiation, whether he knows it or not. He has a boss. The boss is paying him. Follow the money. They are more powerful. He is layer 3. He's not layer 2. He's not layer 1. China brokered a multi-billion-dollar trade deal. The infrastructure deals were going across the Gulf. You you go watch any video and you'll be like, damn, there's no crime here. Yeah, there's authoritarianism. Yeah, if you speak against it, you disappear in prison. Yeah, there's an element of that. But what's happening in the West? What's happening in the UK? What's happening in Europe? They're arresting us for sending social media posts. They're putting people in Guantanamo Bay and deporting them for protesting against genocide at the colleges, because all they wanted to protest is they said, my money is going to pay for those weapons. And they didn't want their colleges, and they infiltrate it, and they say, no, you're a terrorist. This is infiltration. You're giving up the First Amendment. This is the fabric of what America, what you said you're proud of. So the US model within the Middle East that led to so much death and destruction after the UK handed it over to America, that model was collapsing because economic strength was fighting back. Think of that lesson. Economic strength, you save in Bitcoin. What's the worst thing that can happen? You have sovereign economic strength. The proof of weapons network wants you to be in debt. They want you to be distracted. I'm able to do this because Bitcoin gave me the freedom to be able to make a difference. The US military industrial complex, the model that was created for profits that cost middle-class Americans $7.5 trillion of debt. It thrived on chaos. But the proof of weapons network, it has now decided to see value in economic stability in the Middle East because Netanyahu could not ethnically cleanse. And that was us. That was us. If they could have, they would have wiped them all out and said, it's ISIS. The network they created, the network they funded, PSYOPs. They're dependent upon controlling the media. We got to speak to each other. They're no longer aligned. The military-industrial complex it now had to pivot to Europe, as I covered in the macro section. It's now begun betting on a GCC rise. The economic power worked. What does that mean? It's not worth the blood anymore. They're just, the proof of weapons network needs to sell the weapons somewhere. But if there's money to be made through economic activity, then it will just put the weapons somewhere else. Just before October the 7th, a deliberate campaign was executed in order to make the suffering in Palestine unbearable, so that when they put the one that they cooperated in Hamas, the one they were paying for, when they were allowed to cross the border on October the 7th, they could recruit the people that they need that didn't know they were working for Israel, that were genuinely resisting against their oppression. How do you manufacture consent? You oppress, you oppress, you oppress. You create violence, you kill their family, you mow the lawn, which was their operations. They were doing it for decade after decade after decade. 80% of residents in Gaza were 100% reliant upon aid. Where did that aid come from? You paid for it. They were funding both sides. You were paying for Israel to mow the lawn, and you were paying for the aid in order to create the resistance, to create the strategic tension, to create inflation for you, wipe out your assets, and give it to the Middle East. We know this because USAID showed that in 2024, $697 million of US money went to ISIS training camps and Al-Qaeda training camps. WikiLeaks revealed everything. We saw the Hillary Clinton emails. Julian Assange told us everything that we needed to know to prove it. What else were they doing? 97% of water was undrinkable. They were manufacturing humanitarian crisis so that they would fight and allow October the 7th. Only 4 hours of electricity were allowed in daily prior to October the 7th. 63% of 20-year-olds were unemployed. Illegal settlements were expanding. They were taking people out of their home. The Israeli government was handing over to Israeli terrorists guns, giving them bulldozers, and allowing them to take out people's houses and rebuild for them. State-sponsored ethnic cleansing and being able to commit that. So who orchestrated October the 7th? Are you telling me that a partnership between MI6, MI5, CIA, all of the artificial intelligence, all of the surveillance state that exists in Gaza, the most powerful surveillance technology in the world, biometric technology that knows exactly everything about every Gazan, that has all of the technology of artificial intelligence that was being beta tested in Gaza with the cooperation of the strongest economies in the world, that they didn't know October the 7th was going to happen. At a minimum, Hamas knew, Hezbollah knew, the Houthis knew, Iran knew, Syria knew. But I believe many other global regional actors also knew that it was coming. And they allowed it to happen. Some because this shit was never going to be solved. And it was a strategic approach saying, if Netanyahu cannot ethnically cleanse and he creates the carnage, then he has a set time to do it. And if he doesn't win, then his reputation gets destroyed. There's regime change, and the global capital says there will be peace in the region. So I believe the GCC knew. I know that Israel knew. I believe that US knew. I believe that Russia knew. And I believe that certain elements of China knew. I'm not sure exactly. I can't prove it. But that's why we've had to sit back and watch this. For the first time in 70 plus years, the axis were aligned. It wasn't strategic tension. Hamas, Hezbollah, they were aligned with essentially what Israel was trying to achieve as well. At the highest level. I'm not talking about the whole thing. The GCC are prepared to step in economically. Iran played along to see where it actually goes. They created the strategic tension. They allowed the strikes to later remove the Hamas leader, the Hezbollah leader. What did you get from this? The leadership got removed. The GCC now take greater control. Iran stayed passive. If they wanted to escalate with Israel, you know that they've got the weapons to do so. This was just theatrics. It's theatrics. It's Operation Gladio. This is all signaling a shift. Israel knew about October the 7th. They knew it was coming. They let it happen. It was the trigger they needed to justify the total war on Gaza. The objective was to erase Palestinians. It was to rebrand. It was to finish the colonial project, get rid of them once for all, under the Biden administration, under Genocide Joe and Holocaust Harris, and they had until the Trump administration to achieve it. They do it all under the smokescreen of defense. They do it under the smokescreen of saying that this is the persecuted Jews that are being attacked and killed by the Muslims. They weaponize the Jewish faith. They radicalize. They weaponize the Islam. They radicalize. They weaponize Christianity to radicalize, to push those narratives, and they do that through control of media. Both sides thought they could win in this. It was a battle to see who could win. Hamas was betting on a war of attrition and survival. All they needed to do was survive, and then Israel would be exposed. Everyone would release the videos. Everyone would protest against it. The model would die because the reputation was over. They relied upon the reputation. They relied upon them being able to annex. They relied upon anybody that criticized being called a self-hating Jew or an anti-Semite. In fact, they benefited from anti-Semitism. They encouraged anti-Semitism, and they created false flags to get people to be scared enough to move to Israel in the first place. The cost has been absolutely catastrophic, but this is how Operation Gladio and the Proof of Weapons Network works. Since October the 7th, Israel has spent an estimated $42 billion on arms and operations. Profits has been returned to the military-industrial complex. It incurred another $65 billion in economic losses from disruptions to tourism and trade for the Houthis and various other things. In Gaza, Israel bombardment has caused $35 billion in damages. It's going to require $53 billion in order to rebuild. They're probably going to build a smart city surveillance and beta test it for our central bank digital currency and America's Stablecoin Standard, using the data that we know comes from the back end of X and goes to some of this biometric technology in Israel with CrowdStrike and various other layers on top that provide the cybersecurity. Because it all came from the military-industrial complex. And those in the Trump administration, they're all carving their piece of the dollar and they're all involved in the same network. And we're led to believe that we're meant to ask the very same people perpetrating the crime to save us from the crime. I'm sorry they lied to you, but I can't see any difference, and tell me where I'm wrong. And I don't want any of this cultist. You need to tell me, follow the money, tell me where I'm wrong. And I don't, maybe you think it's 16D chess. If the 16D chess, I'll be the first to create a whole video around what an idiot was, how I was wrong, and we're actually moving to an amazing environment where none of this stuff has to happen. It was all about decimating the economy and infrastructure in Lebanon. It was about taking out Beirut. They've now got $11 billion in losses. They've had human catastrophes. This is how proof of weapons network works. It relies on you not knowing, thinking that you are the civil ones. You are the ones that are defending democracy. That's a narrative while all of this is happening. While basically displacing tens of thousands, damaging homes, damaging farmland, making it where you can't farm the land, they can't eat, get rid of all the public infrastructure, get rid of all the universities, get rid of all the schools, get rid of all the hospitals, get rid of the cancer research unit, get rid of everything, get rid of the water plants, and actually get away with genocide and prove that you can get away with it even while it's being filmed, because that's the beta test. If you can do it there, they can do it to you. But Israel's attempt to ethnically cleanse Gaza lost. It didn't work. And now the timeline is up. The military-industrial complex needed Gaza erased, I believe, in 2024. And it needed to be done under Biden. The objective just didn't work. It didn't work because we fought back. Trump won the election. He said, ceasefire now. I need everything to be done on the first day. He then met with Netanyahu, covered up for him, and just said, you got carte blanche to do whatever you want. And now there is a strategic escalation in order to give Israel as much leverage moving into the negotiation. The military-industrial complex has pivoted over to Europe. Finance has basically said, we're going to stabilize the Middle East. You didn't do it, Netanyahu. Israel's no longer useful to us. Let's stop this shit. Let's do economic integration and normalization. GCC is getting growth out of this whole thing. They're getting to invest between China and America. They get to invest in the AI. We get to rebuild the world order. America retreats. America becomes a regional power. And America and Europe no longer get to terrorize the region and pretend that it's something that it's not. The war economy has left the region. Zionism as an ideology to justify violence has been exposed, and everybody should just not use it anymore. Call it what it actually was. It was a bunch of atheists that were creating jurisdiction to fund war and weaponizing the trauma of various things that had happened between the Christians and the Jews, and then using that as a justification, and then creating a boogie monster called the Muslims and the war on terror. The whole thing was theater, and it's still being used to manufacture consent right now by doing exactly what they do in Operation Gladio, which is they use their own terror and then blame it on ordinary people to infiltrate any resistance against it. They say that they're doing it for defense. That was the word that they used. But nothing was static. This whole time, I believe it was a test, and we are where we are because of what we all did. Nothing was a waste of time. Everybody was hedging their bets. People were thinking, what if it goes this way? What if that happens? But it was a multi-year strategy, and I can't see any other outcome right now. October the 7th was not spontaneous. It was a boiling point after years and years and years of pressure, years and years of economic shifts and destruction, years and years of failed crimes against humanity, years and years of ethnic cleansing, lies, gaslighting, everything. But now it's going to result in a free Palestine. It has to, but that's why we did the work. So I want to empower you to know that if you allow them to get away with it, I believe it will come back. And we've got to keep doing our work, because if they could have got away with it, they would have. US is now retreating from the region. Why? Because it's got its own shit to work on. Multi-decades of abuse, not investing in its own infrastructure, allowing the middle-class Americans to go to war based upon lies and gaslighting. Same as what's happening in Europe right now. Zero care for the Europeans. Abuse of investing in infrastructure. Allowing drug addictions. Allowing human trafficking. Allowing sex trafficking. Allowing abuse after abuse after abuse. But now the world has changed. The world order has changed. It's time to move forward. Israel is completely weakened. Europe is completely weakened. America is completely weakened. This is a Palestinian strategic victory based upon the people of Europe and people of America deciding that they're going to fight back against what's wrong. What's wrong? Crimes against humanity, not crimes against Europeans, not crimes against Americans, crimes against humanity. They fought back against, even though it was not in their interest. You know the amount of things that happened to me because I stood up for what I believed to be right? They weaponize everything. They try and tarnish you. They call you an anti-Semite. They shut down your bank accounts. They are a powerful network. The sacrifice you have to go through, but that's the test. Are we willing to do it? Or are we complicit and say that's something that happens to them, not us? Even Putin has now come in and stepped in to say that he would like to mediate to resolve Gaza. And Putin is aligned with America because the agenda has changed. This is a signal of a new power structure. This is the US slow exit and retreat from the region, and no more people need to die for the US dollar proof of weapons network. Putin's had continuous meeting with Steve Witkoff from World Liberty Financial, envoy to the Middle East. Why is Putin involved? Then they had their meeting. Because Steve Witkoff is very close to the Saudis and the GCC. That's where their money is coming from. That's who they're investing with. That's how Harry Kushner set up the fund that Trump set up in order to invest in the region. Follow the money, and you can see the new power structure. This is the handing over of mediation from Israel and US of the solution to the Israeli-Gaza conflict once and for all, over to GCC, over to Russia, over to China. And everyone's still trying to look strong. America's still trying to look strong. That's why they're bombing. I'm sorry, it's going to be a strategic mistake. It was a strategic mistake for Biden. It will be a strategic mistake for Trump. But as long as he can frame it in MAGA and people follow along, then okay. Focus on yourself. It will come back to bite you, I'm sure. I'm sure of it. I mean, Steve Witkoff had nothing to do with Ukraine. Why is he meeting Putin? Because these are connected. They're not talking about Ukraine. Ukraine's already been resolved. What happened? Zelensky was in on it. Russia was in on it. America was in on it. The deep state of Europe was in on it. It was just profits, asset stripping. It was carving up the country. It was killing people. It was for the profits of BlackRock, military industrial complex, proof of weapons network. We got to wake up, people. This was never. We are the useful idiots if we consent. And look what happens to us when we consent. Ukraine is sliced, diced, ruined. People died for no reason. It's a proof of weapons network. It's all in the name of evil mafia profits. And they just need us to still believe in the system. The US just wanted minerals. Why? Because who pays for the politician? Who paid for Biden? Just like who paid for Trump? The minerals were needed for batteries, for EVs, for a globalist vision that can get them from China, wants to get them local. Russia and US, they've probably always been on the same page about this, about Ukraine. It was about wiping out Europeans and Europe. It was about switching off the gas. It was about getting that gas over to America. And then it was about renegotiating the map and the New World Order. It was about saying, right, America will sell weapons to the EU. They can increase their budget. They can wipe out Europeans and print more money. They can then use that to negotiate the future of the European Union. They can weaken it. They can do open border policies. They can fund it through NGOs and colleges. Follow the money, follow the proof of weapons network. We can decide whether we're going to strengthen the euro dollar, whether the euro dollar is useful. We needed to install European Union and ECB. What about the petrodollar? Well, we can decide, Saudi can decide whether they're going to do some of it in the middle. They can reshape the region. They can say some of it's going to be done in alternative currencies. That impacts oil prices. It's all connected. Basically, I'm sorry to say it, but Trump and his cronies are asset stripping America right now. And the EU and the ECB are asset stripping Europeans. Americans and Europeans every day. If you're not connected to the proof of weapons network, you're on the other side of this. And you either need to fight back with Bitcoin. And you need to stop thinking that they're in it for you. Because all the money tells me they're not. This genocide was absolutely unbelievable. Everything we've been through since October the 7th is a beta test. They're beta testing the technology in Gaza that they will eventually use on you. The EU is beta testing 1984, communism on a blockchain. The US is beta testing a technocracy. And what are we getting out of it? A new world order, as I said. That's better than World War III. But we got work to do. We got work to do. We can't let the politicians get away with it. You have to fight against them. A few more bits of news and then we're all done. Russia says that friendly ties and cooperation rather, between China, Iran, and North Korea are flourishing and stronger than ever. That's the new BRICS corridor. They're going to support the global south. They're going to rebuild the global south. They'll become the next center of oppressors. But not if we can split the world into blocks. Global hegemon has to end. Global hegemon killed 300 million people to prop up the pound and the dollar. No more. We need competing forces. If we have competing forces, they will trade with each other, and competition is always the solution. The world has changed. I believe America will have a Bitcoin strategic reserve. I think BRICS will settle using Bitcoin as their network. I think the Middle East will diversify their resources and build Bitcoin strategic reserves. I believe they're doing it already. But Europe is the ones that were meant to get taken down, because Europe is the beta test. And so the European countries that want to look after Europeans and their own people can fight back with Bitcoin, but they're not doing it. So you fight back, and then you guide your companies to fight back with Bitcoin. Go back to the Bitcoin section. I covered how individuals can protect themselves with Bitcoin, how companies can protect themselves with Bitcoin, and how countries can protect themselves with Bitcoin. So protect yourself with Bitcoin. It is the gift that we were given. And always remember, you are alive at one of the most interesting times in financial history. Most are going to get wrecked. Others are going to do really well. I want you to be on the right side of the change so that we can do it with peace, love, unity. That's going to be everything for Bitcoin Hard Talk, episode 76, This Week in Bitcoin, This Week in Macro, This Week in Geopolitics. If you missed one of the video, go back. They all go back on top of each other because I need you to be knowledgeable. Please help me share. Please subscribe. Please like. Please comment. Go over to simondixon.com. Join the Bitcoin Hard Talk membership portal. We back up everything in case we get barred. Go over to Telegram, join my group where we give notifications. Follow me on Rumble in case YouTube gets taken down. And I will always give updates throughout the week on X every single day. So follow me on X. And hopefully we can get 100,000 subscribers on YouTube so I can get that review and I can get back to growing this message to as many people as possible. But I need your help to achieve that. Peace.